Chapter 25:15. Ji Tianqing returned to the distorted spacetime and began the next step of his plan. He did not put away the sword of burial of heaven. Instead, he summoned the ninth heaven cauldron. Then he began to activate the formation in the divine cauldron and ignited the astral divine fire. Half an hour later, the temperature in the divine cauldron reached its peak. The astral divine fire also surged to its peak. Therefore, he took out a large number of origin stones and placed them into the divine cauldron. He also placed the sword of burial of heaven inside. Without a doubt, he wanted to use the divine cauldron to refine the sword of burial of heaven. He wanted to fuse the origin stones into the sword of burial of heaven to increase the grade and power of the divine sword. Currently, the sword of burial of heaven was only a low-grade martial god divine weapon. According to the God's classification of divine weapons, this was only a low-grade void god divine weapon. However, Ji Tianqing believed that after the origin stones were fused into the sword of burial of heaven, the quality of the sword of burial of heaven would increase by leaps and bounds. It would definitely surpass the void god level and reach the true god level. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Ji Tianqing stared at the ninth heaven cauldron intently. He formed a divine seal with both hands and continuously used the astral divine fire and the golden light divine seal. The ninth heaven cauldron's formation sped up and began to melt the origin stones and the sword of burial of heaven. This process was very long and would definitely take a long time. However, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry. He methodically cast his spells to refine the weapon. 1 month, 3 months, 8 months. A year passed quickly. The origin stones had melted. The sword of burial of heaven had also melted into a dark red metallic liquid. Ji Tianqing focused on casting his refining method and fusing the two together. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. 5 years passed quickly. The origin stones were all fused into the sword of burial of heaven, causing its material to change. Its grade also reached the true god level. However, this was not the end. Ji Tianqing continued to cast his divine art and added true god formations and restrictions to the sword of burial of heaven. 1 ray, 2 rays, 5 rays, 9 rays. 10 years later, when Ji Tianqing successfully added the 36th restriction, the refining was finally completed. He stopped casting and recuperated for half a month. The burial of heaven sword was in the divine cauldron. After being tempered by the divine fire of the stars, it finally took shape. Shwa! Ji Tianqing raised his hand and shot out a golden light, activating the ninth heaven divine cauldron. The sword of burial heaven flew out of the cauldron and floated in front of him, shining with a cold light. On the surface, the burial of heaven was still pitch black, simple and cold. It hadn't changed much. However, the truth was that the burial of heaven sword had already been reborn into an origin stone divine sword. The sword became longer and wider, reaching a length of more than 4 feet and the width of a palm. Thousands of exquisite patterns had been added to the blade and hilt of the sword, making it even more mysterious and domineering. Anyone who saw the sword of burial of heaven would be shocked and terrified. Ji Tianqing stretched out his hands and held the sword of burial of heaven in his palms. After carefully examining it for a moment, he smiled in satisfaction. Old friend, congratulations on returning to the true God level. You can roam the galaxy again. As he spoke, the voice of the burial of heaven immediately rang out in his mind. In the future, when I encounter the Heaven Punisher's battleships, I will be able to cut them into pieces like cutting vegetables. Even the dragon subduing general will not be able to block my sharpness. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. He said in a playful tone, "Don't worry. We will be able to take our revenge very soon. Even if the Heaven Punisher doesn't dare to make a comeback, I will find them for revenge." At this moment, a fiery red figure sped over from afar. Ji Tianqing put away the sword of burial of heaven and turned around. He saw Ji Ku dressed in a fiery red dress, rushing over with a straight face. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Ji Ku landed in front of him. She could not wait to say, "Big brother Tianqing, something has happened." "What?" Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. He placed his hands on her shoulders and asked in a serious tone, "Cuckoo, don't be anxious. Tell me slowly. What happened?" Ji Ku organized her thoughts and explained, "I just ended my seclusion a few days ago. I left the godly pagoda and went to the Luoshui god nation to deal with government affairs. Just now, Little White sent me a communication jade slip. He said that something has happened to the human race in the Earth's core. I know that you were in seclusion in the godly pagoda, and could not receive Little White's message. You must not know about this. I did not want to disturb your cultivation, so I sent Little White a message to ask him what had happened. I could help him solve it. However, Little White refused to tell me the details. He said that you had to go personally. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. He also sent me a message saying that the human race's situation in the Earth's core has stabilized. It has only been 2 months and something has happened again. Why do I have to go and solve it? Could it be that Ba-er and his son and the high priest want to break away from my control? That shouldn't be the case. With their strength, how could they resolve the hypnotic divine art? Jiku also frowned and said worriedly, Brother Tianqing, we all know Little White's personality. He has always been confident and arrogant. If he could solve it himself, he would not trouble you. So I think that he must have encountered something troublesome. Ji Tianqing no longer hesitated. He nodded and said, yes, after I subdued the human race in the Earth's core, I never went back. I will take this opportunity to go and see what is going on. Jiku hurriedly took his arm and said in a firm tone, I want to go too. Ji Tianqing thought for a while. Even if the sea of lava was dangerous, it was not a threat to him and Jiku. So he nodded in agreement. The two left the godly pagoda together and rushed to the north of the Heaven's End God Nation. After a day and a half, the two arrived at their destination and entered the hidden dragon abyss. Flying along the hidden dragon abyss, the two of them reached a depth of over 1,000 miles and entered the lava ocean. Naturally, the journey was smooth. When the human race guards saw them, they did not dare to stop them. Jiku was already a LV3 martial god, and had inherited the divine path inheritance of the divine bird. She had become a typical fire element martial god. No matter how dangerous the sea of lava was, it was not a threat to her. She even traveled through the sea of lava like a fish in water. She was very comfortable. Half an hour later, the two entered the Earth's core temple deep in the Black Gold Mountain range. When they entered the cave by Long Chief Baha, and the high priests were discussing something important, the atmosphere was serious and heavy. Seeing that Ji Tianqing and Jiku had arrived, Bai Long's eyes immediately lit up, and he hurriedly came up to greet them. Disciple greets Master and Mistress Mingyue. Jiku was stunned. Her face flushed red. She glared at Bai Long and said angrily, Little Bai, don't talk nonsense. Back then, she and Bai Long had followed Kenshin. They were Kenshin's most trusted and closest people. At that time, White Dragon was also a divine monarch like her. He addressed her very intimately and called her Bright Moon. But now Jika's identity had changed. Bai Long showed a teasing smile and raised his eyebrows. Master's wife, Master and Master's wife have tacitly agreed to this matter. Why can't you let it go? I don't dare to laugh at you. I'm sincerely happy for you. You're still talking. Jiku glared at him again. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said seriously, Bai Long, what is so serious that I have to deal with it personally? End of chapter. Chapter 25:16. When it came to serious matters, Bai Long immediately put away his joking attitude. He pointed at Ba-er and his son and explained to Ji Tianqing, Master, the matter is like this. Ba-er and his son have been doing their best to carry out the task, and the task of mining the source stone mine is also progressing steadily. However, just 5 days ago there was an accident in this area. 6 soldiers in charge of mining suddenly disappeared. When Baha-er received the news, he sent 20 guards to check the situation. Unexpectedly, half of the 20 guards also disappeared. The remaining 10 guards hurriedly retreated and came back to report the news. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing knew that there was an accident in the mining process, and not something wrong with Ba-er and his son. He frowned and asked, I heard that the magma sea is very dangerous. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to investigate. Bai Long, have you investigated? Why did those soldiers and guards disappear? Did they encounter some fierce beasts or strange beasts? Bai Long nodded, then quickly shook his head and explained, Master, after I received the news, I knew that the matter was serious, so I personally took Ba-er and his son to investigate the situation. I searched the area and didn't find any traces of fierce beasts or traps. However, I found a black hole that seemed to be hiding some kind of formation that contained powerful divine power. However, I and Ba-Er didn't dare to enter rashly, and we couldn't investigate the formation in the black hole. I vaguely felt that the black hole might involve some kind of secret, so I quickly sent a message to Master's wife and asked you to come in person. Ji Tianqing understood the ins and outs of the matter and nodded slightly. By long, you did well in this matter. The magma sea is located in the depths of the Earth's core, and the human race in the Earth's core has existed since ancient times. Since a black hole appeared in the magma sea, perhaps there is a formation and divine power. It is most likely related to ancient times. This matter is definitely not a small matter. There is no time to lose. Let Ba-Er and his son take charge of the overall situation and don't affect the others' mining. Bring me there to see what's going on. Bai Long obeyed and used the human language of the Earth's core cave to warn Ba-Er and his son. Then he led Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku out of the cave. After the three of them flew out of the Earth's core divine palace, they shuttled through the sea of lava and flew straight towards the north. The magma ocean was not flat, and the terrain was also undulating. But in general, the southern terrain was higher, and the magma sea was shallower. The further north they went, the lower the terrain became, and the deeper they went into the Earth's core. The magma sea also became deeper. Ji Tianqing and the other two shuttled through the magma at lightning speed. They were getting closer and closer to the core of the Earth. Unknowingly, a day had passed. The three of them flew for over 200,000 miles and arrived at the depth of 2,000 miles, 400 miles under the lava. In such an environment, not only did they have to endure the terrifying heat, they also had to endure the suppression of the endless magma. The pressure had already reached an unimaginable level. Even if a towering mountain with a radius of several hundred miles were to descend from the sky, it would be nothing more than this. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing, Ji Ku, and White Dragon were strong enough to travel freely in this area. Ji Ku was immersed in the endless lava. His divine body could not help but absorb the power of fire. He did not feel uncomfortable at all. She looked around and could not help but exclaim, "Oh my God! The temperature and pressure here are so terrifying. How would the human warriors in the Earth's core dare to move around here? Wouldn't they be burned to ashes and crushed into meat paste?" White Dragon smiled and explained, "Master's wife, the humans in the Earth's core have lived here for tens of thousands of years. They have long evolved and mutated. Of course, they can adapt to such an environment. Just like the cold and dark depths of the ocean, the pressure is also very strong. But those ordinary fish can still move around in the deep sea. They are not crushed into meat paste." Ji Ku glared at him and said, "Humph, you know so much. There's nothing you don't know." White Dragon smiled proudly and said, Of course. I am the one and only star of wisdom. If Master's wife has any questions in the future, feel free to ask me. I promise to explain everything clearly to you." Seeing how proud he was, Ji Ku frowned and stopped bickering with him. It was the same in her previous life. She had never won against White Dragon. At this moment, Ji Tianqing pointed at a black rock in the sea of lava and asked, "White Dragon, is that the place where the incident happened?" White Dragon hurriedly nodded and explained, "From here it looks like a huge ore. But in reality, it is a small mountain buried in the lava. It is at least a few dozen miles wide." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Let's go take a look." With that, he led White Dragon and Ji Ku and flew near the black ore. After a moment of close observation, he realized that it was just as White Dragon had said. It was an oval-shaped black rock mountain that was about 50 miles long. More than 70% of the black rock mountain structure was origin stones. The rest was made up of various metals and gems. If we refine this origin stone mine, we will definitely be able to obtain hundreds of millions of standard-sized origin stones, as well as many rare metals and gems. Previously, the amount of origin stones that we obtained from the Earth's core cave was not even 10% of this small mountain. This is a shocking amount of wealth and resources. Ji Tianqing could not help but exclaim. White Dragon also nodded in agreement. If we can move this small mountain of origin stones back, of course that would be great. However, this small mountain of origin stones is not simple. Master, you should be careful. With that, he led Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku to the other side of the origin stone mine. Master, look. That is the mysterious black hole that I discovered. Ji Tianqing looked in the direction he was pointing. Indeed, he saw a black hole with a radius of 3 meters at the bottom of the origin stone mine. The entrance of the black hole was the same color as the mine. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to notice it. Ji Tianqing slowly approached the black hole and released his divine sense to explore it, carefully inspecting it. However, once his divine sense entered the black hole, it was swallowed by some kind of power. He could not detect the situation inside the hole at all. Interesting indeed. Ji Tianqing was interested. He revealed a look of anticipation and tried other methods. However, after spending 15 minutes and using 6 different divine techniques, he still could not detect the situation inside the black hole. The only thing he could be sure of was that there was indeed a divine-level formation inside the black hole. It constantly emitted powerful divine power waves. However, the divine power he released was completely swallowed the moment it entered the black hole. It did not cause any ripples. Ji Tianqing could not do anything for the time being. He could not move the entire origin stone mine. White Dragon and Jiku were also very anxious. They racked their brains to think of a solution. After a moment of silence, Ji Tianqing suddenly thought of an idea. He took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Now that the Sword of Burial of Heaven is a divine weapon made of origin stones, it should be effective. Chapter 25:17. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing held the Sword of Burial of Heaven and dived into the black hole. As expected, the black hole did not release any mysterious devouring power, and the Sword of Burial of Heaven was safe and sound. Therefore, Ji Tianqing released his divine power and instantly shot out dozens of sword gleams towards the formation in the black hole. Bang! 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 The powerful and violent sword gleams slammed onto the invisible barrier of the formation, and a series of loud bangs were heard. In the blink of an eye, the sword gleams were shattered and the divine light fragments were devoured. Although his probing failed, Ji Tianqing was not discouraged. Instead, he saw hope. He began to use the Sword of Burial of Heaven as his eyes to observe the invisible formation in the black hole. Under the probing of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, the situation in the black hole quickly appeared in his mind. The 2 broken but intertwined formation veins quickly became clear. Ji Tianqing carefully observed for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, revealing a hint of surprise. Those 2 broken divine formations have surpassed the true God level and reached the heavenly God level? No wonder the black hole is so mysterious. It can block my divine consciousness and devour all divine power. Hearing his 2 sentences, Jiku and White Dragon were stunned for a moment, revealing an expression of disbelief. The 5 elements world is just a mortal world. How could there be a heavenly God-level formation? Could the ancient legends be true, and there were many gods in this world tens of thousands of years ago? Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, "Of course the ancient legends are true. There's too much evidence to prove it. What we need to consider now is not this problem but how to break the 2 broken formations." Bai Long frowned and said gloomily, "Master, isn't this too difficult? We're only virtual God level, and those are heavenly God level formations." Jiku glanced at him and added, "Those are just 2 broken divine formations." Bai Long retorted, "Even if they're broken formations, they're still heavenly God level formations. How can we break them?" "Master's wife, others may not know what the heavenly God realm means, but how could you not know?" Jiku frowned and said unhappily, "Anyway, I believe in Brother Tianqing. He can do it." A bitter smile appeared on Bai Long's face as he shook his head. "Mistress, blind superstition is useless. No matter how heaven-defying Master is, it's impossible for him to break through a heavenly God's formation that's 2 major realms above him." While the 2 of them were bickering, Ji Tianqing ignored them and started trying to break the array. He roughly guessed that the 2 incomplete formations in the black hole were the 18-layer defense formation that had been popular in ancient times. The structure of this kind of divine formation was complicated and contained the mysteries of yin and yang, the 5 elements, light and darkness. Even an ordinary heavenly God powerhouse might not be able to successfully decipher it. In his previous life, Kenshin had spent his entire life studying the way of the sword. He didn't know much about formations, alchemy, or artifact forging. But even if he only spent his free time researching, He still became a top-notch master of formations, alchemy, and artificing, surpassing many god kings. Coincidentally, he had come across the 18-layer defense formation when he was flipping through an ancient book. Out of curiosity, he carefully read the layout and deciphering method of this kind of divine formation. Now that 1,000 years had passed and he had lived 2 lives, many of his memories were blurry. However, the sword god had an eidetic memory. The information about the 18-layer defense formation was imprinted in his divine soul memories. Ji Tianqing frowned and pondered for a long time before he finally found the relevant information from the vast sea of memories. He looked at the pitch-black hole with a serious expression. His left hand formed a seal while his right hand held the sword of burial of heaven, slowly releasing vast divine power. The brilliant golden divine power temporarily reached the level of a true god after being amplified by the sword of burial of heaven. Under Ji Tianqing's control, the dark golden divine power poured into the 2 incomplete formations like flowing water and started flowing slowly. Soon 10 breaths passed. The 2 incomplete formations in the black hole finally reacted. Swoosh! Suddenly, the 2 incomplete formations lit up with a dazzling golden light and emitted a violent divine power fluctuation. Boom! A violent divine power shockwave burst out from the black hole and hit Ji Tianqing, Ji Ku, and Bai Long hard. Fortunately, the 3 of them were strong enough. They were only pushed back a few steps and were not injured. Ji Ku and Bai Long were shocked. They looked at the black hole and the 2 glittering incomplete formations in disbelief. Wow! Wasn't Master too valiant? Those are heavenly god-level formations. If you really deciphered them, the coffins of those ancient god kings won't be able to hold on any longer. Martial gods were only virtual gods. There was a world of difference between true gods and heavenly gods. No matter how powerful a virtual god was, it was impossible for him to cast or decipher a heavenly god-level formation. This was a truth that the ancient gods recognized. If Ji Tianqing could really create a miracle, he would be the first person in history. Ji Ke was also excited. He said excitedly, "Xiao Bai, did you see that? I still believe that there's nothing in this world that can stop Brother Tianqing." Bai Long immediately changed his words and nodded. "Of course. Don't you know who my master is? He's a peerless divine king who dares to compete with the heavens. There's nothing in this world that my master can't do." Ji Ke glanced at him and smiled mockingly. "TSK, that's not what you said earlier. You're such a fickle guy." Bai Long wasn't embarrassed at all. He said seriously, "That was a conservative estimate. Always prepare for the worst in advance. That's called being prudent. Moreover, I said that on purpose to stimulate my master's pride and fighting spirit. Only then can I help him create a miracle. How would you understand my good intentions?" Ji Ke glared at him and snorted disdainfully. "Humph. Steady and steady? Good intentions? You're not humble at all." The white dragon put on a humble smile and said, "I learned all this from my master. He was the one who trained me to be so outstanding. You're so shameless." Ji Ke rolled his eyes at him and pretended to vomit. The 2 of them were fighting happily, but Ji Tianqing was not affected at all. He focused on breaking the formation. Time passed quietly. Soon 6 hours had passed. The 2 broken formations in the black hole were finally broken by Ji Tianqing and gradually disappeared. The invisible barrier and devouring force disappeared. The black hole was no longer mysterious and became ordinary. "Come, let's go in and take a look." Ji Tianqing stopped and stepped into the black hole with the sword of burial of heaven. Bai Long and Ji Ke quickly followed and looked around expectantly. The 3 of them entered the black hole and walked for 3,000 feet before entering the interior of the Origin Stone Mine. A spacious cave with a radius of 20 miles appeared in front of the 3 of them. In the huge cave, the surroundings were pitch black and the air was dead silent. Bai Long waved his hand and released a ball of golden light. It floated in midair and illuminated the entire cave. As a result, an ancient and magnificent black stone palace suddenly appeared before the eyes of the 3 of them. End of chapter. Chapter 25:18. The palace was made entirely out of black stone. It occupied an area of more than 10 miles, and was unusually majestic. At first glance it didn't look like a palace, but more like an ancient castle. The palace only had 2 floors, but it was more than 3,000 feet tall. Whether it was the stone gate of the palace, or the stairs and stone pillars in front of the door, they were all unexpectedly huge. Ji Tianqing and the other two only felt that this palace was probably not a place where human gods lived, but was built for giants. The square in front of the palace was already damaged beyond repair, and was full of holes and ditches. The walls of the palace were also cracked, and wide cracks and holes could be seen everywhere. Half of the palace on the right seemed to have been smashed by something heavy, and collapsed. Countless black stones fell down, piling up into a few small hills. In front of the palace's main door, there were a few broken thick stone pillars on the ground. If one looked closely, they would find that the stone pillars and the black stone gate were carved with rough and simple patterns. They were filled with the rough aura of the ancient era. Ji Tianqing stared at the ancient palace, and said with certainty, "This is definitely an ancient palace. The aura of tens of thousands of years can't be faked." Bai Long hurriedly agreed and nodded, "Master, the architectural style of this palace is obviously from the ancient era, but it doesn't look like the work of a human god. From the layout and aura of the palace, it looks more like a cave or temple of a foreign god." Jiku frowned in confusion and asked, "Why would a foreign god's temple be hidden in this origin stone mine? Could it be that in the distant ancient era, there used to be other races living in the sea of magma in the Earth's core?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, "This is only our guess. We have to go into the palace to see the exact situation. I have a premonition that the secrets of the ancient times are hidden in this ancient temple." Bai Long raised his eyebrows and muttered with interest, "A secret from the ancient era? What secret could there be? Could it be the cause and result of the Great War of the Gods? Or could it be the original appearance of the Five Elements world? Master's wife, do you think it's possible that in ancient times the Five Elements world was the same as the God realm and the Dragon realm? They were all eternal main worlds. However, after the War of the Gods, or for some unknown reason, this world fell to become a mortal world?" Ji Tianqing and Jiku were both stunned for a moment. Then they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "White Dragon, where do you get all these weird ideas from? Little White, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you really dare to fantasize. But why don't you think about it? Isn't this too absurd? Main worlds like the God realm and the Dragon realm exist for eternity. How could they fall to become mortal worlds?" White Dragon also felt that it was a little nonsensical. He smiled embarrassedly and said, I just had a sudden idea. However, we have to make bold assumptions and carefully verify them before we can uncover the truth of the universe." Seeing that he was about to spout nonsense again, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and interrupted him. "All right, let's go into the palace first and take a look." After saying that, he stepped across the messy and broken plaza and walked towards the main door of the palace. When they arrived at the black stone door that was 100 feet tall, Ji Tianqing looked up at the two tightly shut stone doors and carefully observed the patterns and array patterns on the doors. Jiku also stared at the door looking for the seal array. Only White Dragon looked around and couldn't help but sigh. "Oh my god, the entire palace is made of origin stones. This is too extravagant. I've decided as long as this palace is useless, I'll move it away." Jiku heard him and asked angrily, "Why are you moving it away? Are you going to break the palace into origin stones and keep it for yourself?" White Dragon rolled his eyes and quickly shook his head. He said righteously, "Master's wife, how could I be that kind of person? I'm moving the palace away because I want to renovate it and make it more beautiful. Then, I'll give it to Master as a residence for Master's wife, and Master's wife to enjoy. If you live in an origin stone palace like this, you'll never lack cultivation resources." Jiku smiled playfully and said, "Humph, at least you have a conscience." At this moment, Ji Tianqing finished his observation and recognized the seal array on the stone door. He smiled. It's the 18-layer sealing array again. However, it's 3 divine arrays stacked together and there are 54 layers of restrictions. Fortunately, the palace has been around for a long time and the array was destroyed by brute force. Now only 10% of its power is left. With the previous experience of breaking the array, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate to cast a spell to break the array. This time, his speed of breaking the formation was even faster. It only took him 4 hours to break the grand sealing formation. The White Dragon walked to the door and pressed both of his palms on the stone door, bursting forth with unparalleled power. Kakakaka. Two giant stone doors that were 1,000 feet tall and weighed more than 10 million pounds slowly opened to both sides. As soon as the stone doors opened a crack, a thick turbid air surged out from the darkness behind the door. It was the air current that had been sealed in the palace. After tens of thousands of years of precipitation, the turbid air had formed. It had a strong corrosive power. Ji Tianqing and the other two had divine power to protect their bodies. Naturally, they avoided the corrosion of the turbid air. When the door opened to 30 feet wide, White Dragon retracted his palms and made an inviting gesture. Master's wife, please. Ji Tianqing and Jiku stepped through the stone door side by side and entered the pitch-black palace. The two of them spread out their divine senses and saw that the hall, which was thousands of feet in radius, was unusually spacious. The black stone floor was full of cracks and covered in a thick layer of dust. In the center and four corners of the palace, there were more than 10 ancient and rough stone statues that had collapsed. At the head of the main hall in the north, there was a half-collapsed stone platform and a shattered throne. Seeing this scene, Jiku couldn't help but mutter, "The palace is a mess. Seems like there was a great battle here." Moreover, it was a battle between immortals. Ji Tianqing nodded. He raised his hand and shot out a beam of starlight into the palace's dome. In the next moment, the pitch-black dome was immediately lit up with densely packed silver light spots. Those light spots were like gems. They emitted dazzling starlight and immediately lit up the entire palace. White Dragon looked up at the dome and said with a smile, "It is indeed the heavenly cycle stellar formation. It is set up with 36,000 stars. This is the standard for a godly king expert to build a palace. Master, this palace is not ordinary. It is most likely the residence of a godly king expert. There is actually a godly king expert living in the core of the five elements realm. This is getting more and more interesting." Ji Tianqing only nodded and didn't say anything. He looked around and walked toward the upper left corner of the palace. There was a pile of shattered origin stones that piled up into a small mountain and covered a wide stone door. Chapter 25:19. With a wave of his hand, Ji Tianqing pushed aside the pile of rubble in the corner. A stone door that was 100 feet tall was revealed. It was tightly shut. There was no sealing array on this stone door. Ji Tianqing pushed it open with a little force. Behind the door was a pitch-black passage that led to the second level of the palace. Ji Tianqing stepped in first and led Jiku and Bailong upward. Although this palace had been asleep for tens of thousands of years, it was basically impossible for people and beasts to exist here. However, the three of them still could not let down their guard. They remained vigilant and alert. Soon, the three of them crossed the passage and entered the second level of the palace. The layout of the second level was similar to the first level. There was also a spacious hall that was surrounded by passages and rooms. Bailong casually opened a few rooms and saw that they were empty. The ground was filled with rubble. The broken black stones were actually pure dawn stones. His heart ached when he saw this. He put the dawn stones into his spatial ring. Jiku looked at this scene and did not say anything. He could not help but snicker. Bailong did not feel awkward. He said things like it's a shame to waste them in a serious manner. After a while, the three of them walked into the spacious hall. This hall was obviously smaller. The surrounding walls were engraved with reliefs. The patterns had long been blurred and looked very abstract. Ji Tianqing looked around and his gaze fell on the stone platform in the middle of the hall. It was a black stone platform that was 100 meters tall. Ancient words and patterns were engraved on the rock walls. The platform was not flat. The pitch-black stone surface was engraved with patterns that formed an ancient and mysterious array. Ji Tianqing observed it for a while. Then his figure flashed and flew onto the platform. He stared at the array patterns under his feet for a while. Then he waved his hand and released 2 rays of starlight into the ancient array. Since ancient times, the gods had always absorbed the power of the stars in the heavens to cultivate. Therefore, for gods of all realms, the power of the stars could be used at any time. Swoosh! The array patterns on the stone platform immediately lit up with dazzling starlight and released a vast wave of divine power. As a result, the entire stone platform began to shake and dust began to fall. Jiku and White Dragon were startled awake. They raised their heads and looked at Ji Tianqing. who was on the high platform, with worried and expectant expressions. Tianqing Gij, you have to be careful. Master, what array are you going to activate? Ji Tianqing didn't say anything. He concentrated on releasing the power of the stars and activating the mysterious array. Soon half an hour had passed. The tens of thousands of lines on the high platform flickered with silver light, blooming with a dazzling radiance. Buzz! The dazzling brilliance of the stars suddenly gathered together, forming a 3-meter-tall silver door. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile. As expected of the work of a godly king expert, a divine array from the primordial era can still be successfully activated. Jiku and White Dragon quickly flew to the high platform and came to Ji Tianqing's side. The two of them looked at the silver door with a doubtful and expectant expression. Tianqing Gij, is this a teleportation array? Master, how do you know this is a teleportation array and that it can be activated successfully? Ji Tianqing pointed at the array patterns beneath his feet and explained. A divine array that can be preserved from the primordial era and can be activated successfully is definitely above the heavenly god tier. However, I don't know where this teleportation array leads to yet. White Dragon smiled and said, isn't that simple? Why don't we go in and take a look? As he spoke, he was about to step into the teleportation door. Jika quickly stopped him. Little White, don't be so reckless. What if you're teleported into a hopeless situation? White Dragon chuckled and said, what if I'm teleported into a shocking treasure trove? Jika snorted and said, humph, then go ahead. I won't stop you. White Dragon naturally would not enter the teleportation door rashly. He turned to look at Ji Tianqing and asked, Master, what do you plan to do? Ji Tianqing said calmly, what else can we do? We can only go in and take a look. However, everyone should be careful just in case. White Dragon quickly nodded to show that he understood. Jiku said confidently, don't worry Tianqing Gij. Even if we're really in danger, I can bring you all back to the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower instantly. Ji Tianqing had the small golden tower and could also escape from a hopeless situation. Therefore, he had enough confidence. He did not waste any more time and stepped into the silver door first. Swoosh! A silver light flashed and Ji Tianqing's figure disappeared. Jiku and White Dragon quickly followed and entered the silver door. Their figures were swallowed by the silver light. In the next moment, in a pitch-black ice-cold void, swoosh! Starlight flashed and Ji Tianqing's figure appeared out of thin air. Then 2 more silver lights flashed and Jiku and White Dragon appeared. The 3 of them stood in the void and looked around before looking down at their feet. They saw that they were surrounded by a vast and boundless void. It was cold and dead silent. In the darkness extremely far away, there were specks of starlight twinkling. Those were the stars in the sky. Under their feet was an incomparably huge dark yellow star. It was because the 3 of them were too close. They were less than 100,000 miles away from that star. As a result, when they looked down, all they could see was a boundless dark yellow color. A vast and boundless aura hit them in the face. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and carefully observed the star below. White Dragon was also shocked and exclaimed in disbelief, oh my god, that teleportation array just now directly threw us into the void. Master, how far are we from the 5 elements world? How do we get home? Jika's observation was more detailed. He pointed at the dark yellow star under his feet and persuaded, Little White, we have long been used to things like traveling through the void. Don't make a fuss. However, that star is obviously dozens of times smaller than the 5 elements world. At a rough glance, the star is a barren desert. There seems to be no signs of life on it. I really don't understand why that teleportation array is connected to this place. Ji Tianqing said calmly, don't worry, it's very easy to go back. Let's take a look at this star and see what secrets it has. With that, he led Jiku and White Dragon and flew down to the star below. Swoosh! The 3 of them flew through the void as fast as lightning and landed on the star after 6 hours. As they saw, this star was barren and without the protection of the celestial wind and fire layer. As far as their eyes could see, there was an endless desert all around them. In between, there were sand dunes of varying heights and the desert that had been eroded by the passage of time. Perhaps there were many mountains and rocks in the desert, but they had been eroded and turned into gravel over the long years. The three of them sped through the desert and tried their best to explore this strange star. Chapter 25:20. Although the void was eternally dark and cold, they could not feel the passage of time. Ji Tianqing and the other two silently calculated the time. They had been flying continuously for a month. In a month, the three of them had traversed tens of millions of miles. However, this dark yellow planet had a diameter of about 100 million miles. The area they had explored in this month was not even 1/10 of the entire planet. Finally, Jiku and Bai Long were a little tired. The depletion of divine power and mental fatigue were actually secondary. The most tiring thing was the exhaustion that came from the heart. This was because in the past month, the tens of millions of miles of territory they had traversed were all unchanging deserts. The scene in front of them at all times was endless yellow sand. There were almost no other colors. The two of them were unwilling to fly any further. They stopped and stood in the air above the desert to rest. Ji Tianqing did not force them. As he silently circulated his energy and adjusted his breathing, he frowned and pondered the problem. Bai Long took out 2 source stones and quickly devoured the divine power inside. He said gloomily, "Master, we've already explored for a month. There's no need to go any further, right? The facts have already proven that there's no life here at all. It's just a barren planet in the middle of nowhere. There's no value at all." Jiku also looked disappointed. He nodded and said, "Big Brother Tianqing, perhaps in ancient times, some kind of civilization once appeared on this planet and life once existed. If not, that teleportation formation would not have been connected to this place. But now that tens of thousands of years have passed, this planet has long been abandoned. There's no trace left behind." Ji Tianqing glanced at the two of them and nodded. "Yes, I know what you're talking about. This planet has long been abandoned. If some kind of civilization once appeared here, even if it disappeared for tens of thousands of years, there should be some traces left behind. But did you notice that in the tens of millions of miles of territory we explored, there's not even a trace of the ancient civilization? What does this mean?" Jiku and Bai Long widened their eyes in disbelief. What does it mean? Could it be that those traces have been erased by someone? Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said slowly, "The first possibility is that a powerful god, such as a divine lord or divine king, used a powerful divine technique to destroy the life on this planet and erase the traces of the ancient civilization. The second possibility is that this planet never had an ancient civilization, nor did any intelligent races exist. This is very likely the divine king's backyard or a place of seclusion." Both Jiku and White Dragon froze for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "Brother Tianqing, I think the first possibility is more likely. After all, there are traces of a great battle in the ancient divine temple. Master, your imagination is truly unrestrained, and your observation skills are also unparalleled. You have seen through everything. To be able to deduce the truth just by looking at the surface, and to be able to restore the situation to its original state. Your disciple is truly impressed." By Long's expression, he was very serious. Jiku rolled his eyes and muttered disdainfully, "Puffed bootlicker." Bai Long pretended not to hear her. He smiled at Ji Tianqing and asked, "Master, since you've grasped the truth, can we go back? After all, we've been away for a month. The plan to mine the origin stones will be affected." Jiku finally understood. He pointed at Bai Long and said, "Ha, you despicable guy. How dare you trick your master?" Bai Long was exposed and smiled embarrassedly. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said calmly, "Since you don't want to explore anymore, let's drop this matter. Although we didn't gain anything from coming to this barren planet. However, this is equivalent to giving us a path to choose. If we can't ascend in the future, we can use the teleportation array to come to this planet. From here we can cross the void and find the nearest mortal world. We can then ascend from that world." Jiku nodded in agreement. Bai Long was startled and asked doubtfully, "Master, this is indeed a path to ascension for the other martial gods of the 5 elements realm. But it shouldn't be of much use to us, right? Didn't you use that divine tool to ascend back then?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. "That's right. Back then, I used the space-time roulette to forcefully break the world's seal and open the path to ascension. Thus, I became the only person to ascend from the five elements realm in tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, the space-time roulette was destroyed in the great battle before I died. I stored the shattered pieces of the roulette in the Yang tomb and can no longer use it. It turned out that Kenshin had stored a shocking treasure in the Yang tomb. Apart from the drop of divine king blood, there was also a space-time roulette. However, Ji Tianqing was well aware that it was a damaged divine tool. Thus, he didn't open the Yang tomb, nor did he think of taking out the space-time roulette. Ah! Bai Long cried out in surprise, revealing a look of deep disappointment. Ji Ke thought for a moment and smiled. This is the will of the heavens. If the space-time roulette is destroyed, we won't be able to ascend. However, we accidentally discovered the primordial shrine and came here through the transportation formation. This is the other path of ascension that the heavens have arranged for us. Ji Tianqing nodded in agreement. Using the space-time roulette to bring the two of you up is actually very dangerous. I almost failed back then. Although I didn't lose my life, I was heavily injured and on the verge of death. After ascending to the dragon realm, I was unconscious for an entire half a year. Fortunately, that old dragon saved me and woke me up. Now it's easy. Once we break through to the true God realm, we can ascend from other worlds and won't have to take such a big risk. If we use the space-time roulette to ascend again, I can't guarantee that we'll succeed. Hearing this, Ji Ke immediately revealed a look of guilt and said with a voice full of pity, "Big brother Tianqing, if I knew that you would have to endure such pain and danger back then, I wouldn't have." Bai Long also lowered his head in embarrassment and scratched his head. Back then, Mistress and I were hiding in the sword of burial of heaven to cultivate and didn't know what happened. I really didn't think that Master would endure such danger for us and almost lose his life. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said with a smile, "All right, let's not talk about this anymore. What happened back then won't happen again. In this life we'll have to rely on our own strength to ascend." Only then did Ji Ke and Bai Long pull themselves together and nodded confidently. "Let's go back." Ji Tianqing summoned the small golden pagoda and cast a holy golden light that covered him, Ji Ke, and Bai Long whoosh. The golden light flashed and the three of them disappeared from the sky above the desert. In the next moment, the three of them crossed the endless void and returned to the five elements world. They appeared in the Joqian Ten Absolutes Tower in the Yinyang realm in the north of the Divine Ruins. Chapter 25-21. In the fifth level of the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing and the other two appeared on the demon god altar. The celestial star formation on the ceiling shone with cold starlight, illuminating the three of them. Bai Long looked around and revealed a surprised smile. He praised, "We were still in the depths of the void a moment ago, and now we're back in the divine tower. This is amazing." Ji Ke took over and nodded. "This way, it'll be very convenient for us to go back and forth to that star." Bai Long's face fell. He mumbled, "Master's wife, are you still planning to go back to that star?" Ji Tianqing nodded. "Of course, but that's a matter for the future." Then, he looked at Bai Long with a serious expression and ordered, "Bai Long, return to the human race in the Earth's core cave now. Continue to take charge of the situation and supervise them in mining the origin stone mine. As for those missing people in the Earth's core cave, they must have been swallowed by the black hole and killed by the heavenly god-grade formation. You have to find a way to calm everyone down. Just say that those missing people accidentally entered the forbidden area and met with misfortune." Bai Long quickly nodded and said seriously, "Don't worry, Master. I'll definitely take care of this matter. As for that origin stone mine, I'll set up a divine formation to protect it and make it a forbidden area. No one will be allowed to go near it." "All right, go then." Ji Tianqing nodded and waved his hand to activate the origin divine formation. "Master, these are the origin stone mines we collected in the past 6 months. I'll give them to you now." Bai Long took out more than 300 pieces of coarse and huge black ores from his interspatial ring and handed them to Ji Tianqing. Then he bowed to Ji Tianqing and Ji Ke before stepping into the origin divine formation. Swoosh! With a flash of light, Bai Long was sent out by the divine formation. Ji Tianqing put away the origin stone mines and returned to the distorted space-time with Ji Ke to cultivate in seclusion. The following days were very dull. Ji Tianqing, Ji Ke, and Yunyao spent 80% of their time cultivating in seclusion in the distorted space-time. As time passed, the strength of the three continued to increase, breaking through one level after another. In their free time, if Yunyao and Jiku were not cultivating in seclusion, they would deal with the government affairs of the Luoshui God Nation. Their various strategies allowed the Luoshui Divine Nation to quickly recover, and they also received the love and respect of the Divine Nation's citizens. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, was quite busy. When he wasn't cultivating, he was either dealing with the affairs of the Tianqing Divine Kingdom or researching origin stones. After many years of research, he had discovered more than 10 uses of origin stones, and all of them had been verified. Back then, the Jinshan King only took 3 months to complete the task he had given him. He, Yunyao, Jiku, and the White Dragon all received a set of origin stone armors. In addition, Yunyao received 2 origin stone divine swords, Jiku received an origin stone divine spear, and the White Dragon received a long saber. The long saber's appearance was a little strange, and its aura was mighty and domineering. According to the Jinshan King, it was a custom-made origin stone divine saber strictly according to the White Dragon's request. After the divine saber was refined, the White Dragon was very surprised and couldn't bear to part with it. He even gave the saber a strange name, the Green Dragon Crescent Saber. When Ji Tianqing and Jiku heard about this, they were puzzled and asked the White Dragon why he gave it this name. The White Dragon just smiled mysteriously and said the word feelings, and didn't explain further. Seeing that he was acting strange, Ji Tianqing and Jiku didn't ask further. Ji Tianqing took some time to refine a huge amount of origin stones and gave them to the Jinshan King, asking him to start building the origin stone divine ship. This was a serious matter, and the Jinshan King was unusually serious. He and Ji Tianqing discussed for 7 days and 7 nights before finalizing the ship's appearance, structure, layout, weapons, and so on. As for the divine array required for the ship, Ji Tianqing would have to add it in later stages. Furthermore, this was a huge project and it would take at least a few years to complete. The Jinshan King did his best to complete this task, and he even mobilized the strength of his entire clan. He didn't dare to slack off in the slightest. Furthermore, the situation on Xinwu continent had stabilized. The 3 divine kingdoms were established, and all the major races lived in peace. There were no more wars, and the commoners were able to live and work in peace. The martial arts world, which had gone through a calamity, welcomed a flourishing development. Every year, many martial arts geniuses appeared out of nowhere, and a few martial saints had also appeared. After hearing this news, Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and the others were very gratified. If things continued like this and Xinwu continent didn't face any more calamities, it would be great. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing knew that this was impossible. After a short period of peace, Xinwu continent would likely face an even greater crisis. Thus, the task of hunting down and killing the Heaven's Conqueror never stopped. The 3 divine kingdoms had sent out 200,000 experts to search for the survivors year after year. Over the course of 6 years, the 3 divine kingdoms had found over 100 surviving Heaven's Conquerors and killed them all. As a result, there were less than 30 Heaven's Conquerors left on Xinwu continent, and it was impossible for them to cause any more trouble. The matter of encircling and killing the Heaven's Conquerors had temporarily come to an end. However, the plan to suppress the demons at Dark North Mountain would never end. Over the past 6 years, the various empires would often train their soldiers and head to Dark North Mountain for actual combat. The martial arts world's adventurers and ambitious people would often enter and exit Dark North Mountain to train themselves in battles against the demons. Many of the demon tribes had been exterminated, and their population was constantly decreasing. For the next 100 years, the demons would not be able to rise again, much less threaten Xinwu continent. The summer of the 7th year. On a bright starry night, Yunyao had just finished dealing with matters in her divine kingdom, and had returned to Jiutianten Absolute's tower. Just as she entered the distorted space-time, Ji Tianqing flew over. Yunyao hurriedly stopped and asked with concern, "Tianqing, are you preparing to go out?" Ji Tianqing nodded and explained, "It's been almost a year since I've contacted the White Dragon. I need to send him a message and have him send some origin stones over. The Jinshan King doesn't have enough." After a pause he asked, "Yao Yao, you just finished dealing with matters in your divine kingdom. You must be tired, right? Yunyao gently shook her head. Such a small matter can't tire me out. However, Fairy Yuqing sent me a message again, asking about the world seal. Oh, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and smiled. This is the third time she's asked you about it in the past 7 years. It seems like she's getting impatient. Yunyao nodded and said with some regret, it's a pity that it's useless for her to be impatient. Even though I've reached the 8th level of the martial god realm, I still don't have any clues, nor do I have the ability to remove the seal. Ji Tianqing nodded. The deity who placed the seal might not have been goddess Yaoguang. Moreover, only divine lords and god kings have the ability to seal a world. Even if you break through to the true god realm, it's still impossible for you to do so. I think that you should tell her the truth earlier so that she won't have to wait so bitterly. End of chapter. Chapter 25-22. Tell her the truth? Isn't that a little cruel? Yunyao frowned as she could not bear to do so. After hesitating for a moment, she said, why don't we tell her about the primordial shrine? Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, using the ancient teleportation array to reach outer space, there is indeed hope for ascension. However, the prerequisite is that she has to break through to the true god realm. Yunyao's eyes dimmed and she nodded. That's right. Fairy Yuqing is already old, and her time is almost up. I'm afraid that there is no hope for her to break through to the true god realm. I give her some origin stones to help her quickly increase her strength. Perhaps then she will have a chance. When she thought of this idea, her eyes suddenly lit up. Ji Tianqing hesitated for a moment before nodding. That's good too. After all, she has helped us before, and she is also a kind person. He understood that Yunyao had merged the memories of Luo Shui and Yaoguang's spirits, so she had feelings for Fairy Yuqing. As a disciple, how could she bear to see her master wait for death in despair? Therefore, Ji Tianqing did not object to this matter. Yunyao looked at him with a burning gaze and said sincerely, Tianqing, thank you for understanding and supporting me. Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. It's just a small matter, don't take it to heart. Alright, go ahead and do it if you want to. Yunyao nodded and waved goodbye to him before turning to leave the distorted space-time. She wanted to personally return to Tianhai to deliver the origin stones to Fairy Yuqing. Ji Tianqing also left the tower and sent a message to the White Dragon. 15 minutes later, he returned to the 6th level of the distorted space-time and continued his closed-door cultivation. However, before he started cultivating, his emotions were somewhat complicated, and many thoughts flashed through his mind. It has been 8 years since the Heaven Punisher clan was defeated. The situation in Xinwu continent has stabilized, and many hidden dangers have been eliminated. We have obtained a large number of origin stones and powerful origin stones as well as divine artifacts. Our strength has also increased continuously. Now, Yao Yao has reached the 8th level of the martial god realm, and I have broken through to the 7th level. Ku and Bai Long were both in the 6th degree realm, while Qian Yu and Black Dragon were in the 5th degree realm. Even Huang Long had broken through to the martial god realm after obtaining a large number of dawn stones. Based on the current situation, even if the dragon subduing general were to make a comeback, he would only be facing death. But why do I always feel uneasy? Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing's worry in the depths of his mind grew even stronger. He muttered to himself, I've already found the path of ascension. Should I try my best to increase my strength and break through the true god realm as soon as possible and ascend to the upper realm? However, I'm going to ascend soon. Who can protect the 5 elements world? If the experts of the Heaven Punisher race return, who will be able to turn the tide? Ji Tianqing did not want to be the guardian of the 5-element world. He would not treat protecting the 5-elemental world as his mission and responsibility. However, his family and friends were all in this world. It was impossible for them to ascend with him. He was unwilling, and even more unwilling, to see everyone die miserably under the butchering blades of the Heaven Punishers. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing hesitated. If not, I can only postpone the ascension and help everyone increase their strength first. I'll try my best to teach them some divine skills to increase their combat strength and their ability to protect themselves. After making up his mind, he found Jiku, Qianyu and Heilong, who were cultivating in seclusion, and taught them a few profound and powerful divine skills. He also sent out a jade slip with 2 divine skills recorded in it, and gave it to Huang Long, who was far away at Sky Pillar Mountain. In the next half a year, he carried out this plan and helped everyone increase their combat strength. After he was done with this, he began to cultivate in seclusion. Yunyao had also taken care of various matters. She was cultivating in the distorted space to break through to the 9th level of the martial god realm. At the same time, in the center of the Purple Heaven Galaxy, on the huge and prosperous Purple Heaven Star, the war that had lasted for 50 years had finally ended. The purple light barrier that enveloped the entire Purple Heaven Star was riddled with holes, and a few huge gaps had appeared. Originally, Purple Heaven Star had 6 continents and more than 30 kingdoms. Every kingdom was glorious and prosperous with a strong foundation. They also had 2 or 3 martial gods guarding them. However, in the war that had lasted for 50 years, the Purple Heaven Star's experts kept dying. By now, almost 90% of the martial gods from the 6 continents had died. Even a few peak martial gods who had been living in seclusion were forced to show themselves and fight. Their fates were self-evident. They had all died tragically under the siege of the Heaven Punisher's fleet. Purple Heaven Star had lost the protection of the god-level experts, and was naturally defeated. As for the core forces below the martial god realm, they had also suffered a devastating blow. Billions of elite experts from various continents had sacrificed their lives to protect Purple Heaven Star and resist the Heaven Punisher's invasion. Purple Heaven Star had been completely defeated. The martial artists from various tribes could no longer resist the Heaven Punisher's attack, and were about to be enslaved by the Heaven Punisher. Although the Heaven Punisher had also suffered heavy casualties in the war, and had paid a heavy price, the Heaven Punisher's fleet had suffered heavy casualties. More than 70% of Marshal Nanjianan's 16 fleets and 350,000 elite soldiers had died. Now there were only 100,000 soldiers left and they could barely form 6 fleets. However, they had won and all the sacrifices were worth it. Taking over Purple Heaven Star was equivalent to taking control of half of Purple Heaven Star Zone. In the next few hundred years, Marshal Nanjianan would firmly take over Purple Heaven Star and use it as his base camp to gradually develop and expand his forces. The hundreds of worlds in the Star Zone would become his territory. After the Holy Barrier was broken, the Heaven Punisher's fleets drove straight in and entered Purple Heaven Star. Under the command of Marshal Nanjianan, the 6 fleets rushed to the 6 continents and took over the territories as quickly as possible. Each fleet had 16,000 soldiers and they were basically all martial sages. Among them, there were almost 100 martial gods. After they had taken over a continent, they quickly took control of the various holy kingdoms and the leaders of countless cities, and turned them into puppets that they could manipulate at their will. In just half a year, the fleets had taken control of a continent and gained a firm foothold. Next, the Heaven Punisher would establish a new order and system, and enslave the people of various tribes to gather wealth and resources for the Heaven Punisher. At the same time, they sent out thousands of elite soldiers to suppress the forces that resisted. Based on the current situation, it would take at most a few years for the fleets to completely take control of the 6 continents. The forces that resisted would also be destroyed and the situation would stabilize. At that time, Purple Heaven Star would completely become the Heaven Punisher's territory. The martial artists and people of various tribes on the 6 continents, a total of 300 billion people, would become the Heaven Punisher's slaves. As long as the Heaven Punisher was not destroyed, they would never be able to rise again. To the people of Purple Heaven Star, a dark and cruel era had arrived. Chapter 25-23. 10 months later, the situation on Purple Cloud Star was settled. The famous Purple Heaven Cave had also been taken over by the Southern Expedition Marshal, and had complete control over it. This cave that was high up in the astral wind and fire layer was connected to Purple Cloud Star in the void. It was the cave of Heavenly Venerate Zishao. Heavenly Venerate Zishao was the most powerful person on Purple Cloud Star. He was once the leader of the 6 overlords. He was 48,000 years old and had reached level 8 True God Realm. It was very likely that he would break through to the Heaven God Realm. However, in the battle 2 years ago, the Southern Expedition Marshal had led many captains to kill him. Because of heavenly venerate Zixiao's death, the fall of Purple Cloud Star accelerated. The Southern Expedition Marshal had spent a lot of manpower and resources to transform Purple Cloud Cave into his own cave. He was in charge of Purple Cloud Cave and controlled the entire Purple Cloud Star. That evening, in the Purple Cloud Cave, the Southern Expedition Marshal was handling government affairs in the main hall. Suddenly, the guard at the entrance of the main hall reported loudly, reporting to the Grand Marshal, General Long Fu wishes to see you. Hearing the guard's voice, the Southern Expedition Marshal was stunned for a moment before he put down the things in his hands. Long Fu? Ever since this guy returned, he has been recuperating for many years. Now that the situation on Purple Cloud Star is settled, why is he here to see Ben Shuai? Could it be that he wants a share of the loot after seeing the various fleets dividing the 6 continents? The Southern Expedition Marshal frowned as his lips curled into a playful smile. Let him in. The guard at the entrance of the main hall acknowledged the order and quickly let him in. After a while, General Long Fu, who was wearing golden armor, stepped into the main hall. He walked to the spacious stone platform and stood still. He bowed to Marshal Jianan and said respectfully, "Subordinate Fu Long pays his respects to the Grand Marshal." The Southern Expedition Marshal sized him up and raised his eyebrows. He said calmly, "Long Fu, it seems that you haven't wasted your time in the past few years. Not only have you recovered from your injuries, but you have also advanced by 1 level." Indeed, General Long Fu had not only recovered from his injuries, but his strength had also reached level 9 Martial God Realm. His aura was even more unfathomable. He nodded and said in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, "Grand Marshal's eyes are as sharp as torches. You were able to see through this subordinate's facade with just 1 glance. It is truly admirable." Marshal Nan Jianan said expressionlessly, "Fu Long, now that the situation has just stabilized, Ben Shuai still has too many things to deal with. If you're only here to pay respects to Ben Shuai, you can leave now." General Dragon Fu hurriedly bowed and explained, "Grand Marshal, it's because I know that the situation on Purple Cloud Star has been settled and your goal has been achieved that I have come to see you. I wonder if the Grand Marshal still remembers the special 5 elements world that I told you about 8 years ago." Marshal Nan Jianan was startled and frowned. When he first heard about this matter, he threw it to the back of his mind and never took it to heart. No matter how special an ordinary mortal world was, it was not as important as Zixiao planet. Now that he heard General Dragon Fu's reminder, he recalled that matter and said unhappily, "Fu Long, a few years have passed and you're still bringing up the past? Ben Shuai did not blame you for your dereliction of duty, nor did he punish you. Why do you insist on finding excuses to absolve yourself?" General Dragon Fu shook his head and said in a serious tone, "Grand Marshal, what I said is the truth. I'm definitely not finding excuses to absolve myself. That seemingly ordinary world is indeed very special." Marshal Nan Jianan waved his hand and interrupted him. He said in a low voice, "There's no need to say any more. Ben Shuai only needs to know what exactly you want to do." General Dragon Fu did not hide anything and answered truthfully, "I hope that the Grand Marshal can place importance on that world and personally lead a fleet to conquer that world." "Ha ha ha." Marshal Nan Jianan sneered and said in a contemptuous tone, "Ben Shuai has already taken over Zixiao planet. Within 1,000 years, he will definitely take over the entire Zixiao planet. That 5 elements world is just an ordinary world in the star field. Is it worthy of Ben Shuai personally leading the expedition?" General Dragon Fu nodded solemnly and said in a serious tone, "Of course. Only if you go personally will you be able to completely conquer that world. Not only is that world special, but it has also nurtured a powerful god stone. Not only can martial gods use it, but it is also very beneficial to true gods." As he spoke, he took out a black stone from his space ring and presented it to Marshal Nan Jianan. Even though that piece of black stone had an ordinary appearance, and appeared to be completely ordinary, it was still a piece of black stone. However, just as General Dragon Fu took out the black stone, Marshal Nan Jianan's eyes narrowed and he stared at the black stone, unable to look away. Marshal Nan Jianan was a true god elite. Of course he knew what was good for him. He could clearly sense that the black stone contained surging god power and invisible space power. It also gave off a mysterious aura. Most importantly, The material and aura of this black stone had obviously surpassed the true god level. Marshal Nanjinan could not wait to stretch out his hands and hold the black stone in his palms, observing it intently. The more he looked, the happier he became. He even forgot what he had wanted to say. Seeing his reaction, General Dragonfu heaved a sigh of relief and smiled in relief. He knew that he was not far away from success. Therefore, he did not wait for Marshal Nanjinan to ask and took the initiative to introduce, "Marshal, when I invaded the Five Elements world, I enslaved human martial artists to mine for resources underground. Unintentionally, a group of slaves dug up this black stone in the depths of the earth. After I got the stone, I used a secret method to refine it, and found that the God Stone contained pure God power and powerful space power. Therefore, I named it Boundless God Stone. This God Stone, which has never been seen before, is stronger than ordinary God Stone. Not only is the material 100 times stronger, but the God power is also 100 times stronger." Marshal Nanjinan nodded slightly and said without raising his head, "Ban Shui has conquered so many worlds and plundered countless resources, but I have never seen this God Stone." General Dragonfu continued, "I have studied it carefully. The Boundless God Stone has many uses. Not only can it be used to refine real divine weapons, but it can also be used to forge warships. Think about it, if we add this Boundless God Stone when we forge warships, what will the effect be?" Marshal Nanjinan answered without hesitation, "Not only will the warships reach the true God level, but they will also have powerful space power and can achieve space crossing and continuous teleportation. This way, our fleet will be like a tiger that has grown wings, and we will be able to conquer the universe even faster." "That's right." General Dragonfu revealed a look of anticipation and said excitedly, "Therefore, I risked my life to escape back to the Purple Cloud planet to report this news to you." Marshal Nanjinan put down the Boundless God Stone in satisfaction and asked in a serious tone, "Fulong, how many Boundless God Stones do you have?" General Dragonfu replied, "Originally I had 9, but I used them all to reward the soldiers and win their hearts. I only brought 1 back." Marshal Nanjinan nodded and asked, "Then have you estimated how many Boundless God Stone can be produced in the Five Elements world?" Chapter 25-24. Dragon Subduing General thought about it seriously before shaking his head. "This item came from underground, so I can't estimate it either. But I'm sure that the number of boundless divine stones is beyond our imagination." South Conquering Marshal frowned and said unhappily, "Beyond your imagination? Isn't that the same as not saying anything?" Dragon Subduing General hesitated for a moment before patting his chest and saying, "I can guarantee that there are at least 100,000 pieces." 100,000 pieces? South Conquering Marshal's eyes flashed as he muttered, "If there are really so many, Ban Shui can build a super warship." His current warship was only a mid-grade true god warship. If he could get 100,000 pieces of boundless divine stones, the super warship he built would definitely surpass the true god level. That was a true god level warship. From now on, not only would he have inexhaustible divine power, but he would also be able to traverse the universe and travel through countless starfields. Thinking of this, South Conquering Marshal's heartbeat sped up, but he could still maintain his calm. He looked at Dragon Subduing General and asked in a low voice, "Dragon Subduing, if you don't have 100,000 pieces, how are you going to explain yourself?" Dragon Subduing General gritted his teeth and said firmly, "If you don't have it, I'm willing to commit suicide to atone for my sins." In fact, he himself could not estimate how many boundless divine stones there were in the Five Elements world. But for revenge and to gain South Conquering Marshal's appreciation, he decided to go all out. South Conquering Marshal looked at him with a dignified gaze and nodded. "Very good. Since you have such determination and courage, Ban Shui will give you a chance. 10 days later, Ban Shui will personally lead 100 warships to the Five Elements world. Go back and prepare well. Ban Shui looks forward to your performance in the future." 100 warships meant that there would be at least 10,000 heaven-conquering warriors and 100 martial god realm captains. In addition to South Conquering Marshal going personally, the combat power of this fleet could be said to be terrifyingly strong. Dragon Subduing General's wish was finally fulfilled. He was instantly excited and quickly bowed. Thank you for your help and trust, Marshal. I will serve you wholeheartedly and not let you down. South conquering Marshal did not say anything else and waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. The dragon subduing general bowed and bade farewell, leaving the hall in satisfaction. Not long after, the Southern Expedition Marshal issued an order and began to mobilize the troops. In just a few days, hundreds of warships had arrived from various continents and gathered at Purple Heaven Cave. 10 days later, the Southern Expedition Marshal's affairs were settled. He led hundreds of battleships into the starry sky and headed straight for the world of 5 elements. Dragon subduing general's status also rose and he was able to enter the warship of the Southern Expedition Marshal, following beside the Grand Marshal. The distance between Xixiao Star and the 5 elements world was very far. Even if the fleet traveled at full speed, it would take at least a year to arrive. Making use of this chance, Dragon subduing general introduced the structure and style of the 5-element world to South conquering Marshal. Furthermore, he also taught the Southern Expedition Marshal the languages of the human and demon races. In this way, the Southern Expedition Marshal didn't feel bored, and time passed quietly. 3 months, 8 months, 1 year, unknowingly 14 months had passed. The fleet led by the Southern Expedition Marshal finally approached the 5 elements world. 500,000 miles in front of the fleet, there was a huge shining golden star floating quietly in the void. A day later, the fleet arrived outside the golden light barrier and stopped. Dragon subduing general followed the Southern Expedition Marshal to the deck of the warship and observed the golden light barrier. Grand Marshal, this is the spatial barrier that seals the world of 5 elements. It is said to be the work of the ancient gods. Our fleet is unable to pass through the barrier and can only look for gaps and cracks. Dragon subduing general pointed at the golden light barrier and took the initiative to introduce. The Southern Expedition Marshal nodded slightly and asked, "When you led the fleet here, you entered through the spatial crack?" Dragon subduing general nodded. The Southern Expedition Marshal frowned and asked again, "When you escaped from the world of 5 elements, you used the Liaokong plate to break through the spatial barrier?" Dragon subduing general nodded again and explained patiently, "Grand Marshal, the reason why I was able to break through the barrier wasn't because of the Liaokong plate, but because of the realmless divine stone. It was the spatial power of the realmless divine stone that tore through the spatial barrier. However, we only have one realmless divine stone now and are unable to create a large enough crack for the fleet to enter." The Southern Expedition Marshal ordered, "Pass down Ben Shuai's order. Immediately send out a scout team to find the spatial crack." Dragon subduing general hurriedly returned to the warship and passed down his order. Soon 10 pitch-black warships flew out of the vast fleet and headed to different places. The Southern Expedition Marshal and the others waited patiently in the warship. This wait lasted for 2 months. On the 63rd day, a warship sent back a message saying that they had found a spatial crack that the fleet could enter. Hence, the Southern Expedition Marshal led the fleet over. A month later, the fleet arrived near the spatial crack. Only then did the Southern Expedition Marshal realize that there was a black crack that was 5 kilometers long on the golden light barrier. Hence, hundreds of warships lined up and passed through the spatial crack, entering the world of 5 elements. Swoosh! With a flash of red light, the Marshal's warship passed through the spatial crack and appeared in a barren mountain range. Immediately after, there was another flash of red light behind and dozens of warships appeared. After 100 breaths of time, all the warships entered the world of 5 elements and gathered in the sky above the mountains. Everyone looked around curiously, their hearts filled with anticipation. All around them were undulating mountain ranges that were thousands of meters tall, and the gray sky was filled with dark clouds. There were not many forests or trees in the mountain range, and all they could see was grayish-brown soil and rocks. Such a barren scene disappointed the soldiers, and they began to mutter and talk about the dragon subduing general behind his back. However, the Southern Expedition Marshal was very calm and did not seem to be in a hurry. He led the fleet across the mountains and flew towards the south. After 2 hours, the dragon subduing general observed the scenery along the way and finally determined their location. "Marshal, we are in the northern part of the Shengwu continent, the most mysterious and dangerous forbidden area. The primordial ruins of gods. Although this place is very barren and dilapidated, it was the battlefield of the ancient gods and has been destroyed. Furthermore, there is a cemetery of the gods in the depths of the ruins. It is said that after a god from the world of 5 elements falls, a corresponding tomb will appear in the cemetery. The Southern Expedition Marshal's interest was piqued. Oh, there is such a place? Even if a god who has ascended to the higher realms falls, it should have nothing to do with this world, right? The dragon-subduing general shook his head and said solemnly, I am not sure about this. After all, I have not had the chance to enter the cemetery to study the tombs. The Southern Expedition Marshal smiled confidently and said, when Ben Shui has taken over this world, it will not be too late to slowly study it. End of chapter. Chapter 25-25. Whoosh! More than 100 pitch-black warships were arranged in a triangular formation, streaking across the sky like ghosts. As the fleet flew over the mountains, a dark red hurricane of death swept across the land. All living creatures in the mountains, regardless of whether they were birds, fish, insects, demons, or beasts, would die instantly and turn into black ash. Even powerful monsters that had cultivated for hundreds of years would be reduced to dust if they were swept by the dark red hurricane. Such a tragic and strange scene caused many living creatures to panic. The nearby birds and beasts fled in panic, causing chaos and tremors in the mountains. Seeing this scene, many of the heaven-conquering army's soldiers laughed heartily, finding it amusing. Inside the Marshal's flagship, Marshal Nan and General Fu Long were discussing an important matter. Fu Long, what's your first target? General Fu Long's eyes flashed with hatred, and he lowered his head. Reporting to Marshal, it's the Luoshui divine nation. Why? Marshal Nan raised an eyebrow. General Fu Long explained, back then, I conquered the Luoshui divine nation and enslaved billions of humans. Originally, I planned to rest for 10 years before conquering the other 2 divine nations and gradually controlling the entire Xinwu continent. Once I controlled the Xinwu continent, conquering the other continents would be very easy. However, Ji Tianqing and his wife wantonly assassinated my soldiers and ruined my plans. They even joined forces with the emissary of the Divine Ruins and Fairy Yuqing to kill my soldiers and severely injure me, forcing me to escape from the 5 elements realm. Marshal Nan nodded to show that he understood. So, you want to kill Ji Tianqing and his wife first, invade the Luoshui divine nation, and then get rid of the emissary of the Divine Ruins and Fairy Yuqing? General Fu Long quickly nodded and said solemnly, that's right. There are only a few martial gods left in the Xinwu continent, and the 4 of them are the strongest. As long as we get rid of them, no one will be able to stop us, and the entire world will fall. The Southern Expedition Marshal remained calm and didn't take this matter to heart. After all, to him, they were just a few martial gods, and he could destroy them with a wave of his hand. He was more concerned about the Boundless God Stone. Fu Long, where did you get the Boundless God Stone? General Dragon Subduing was stunned for a moment before replying honestly. Within Heaven Extinction God Nation, Marshal Nanjing said in a dignified tone. Then go to Heaven End God Nation and find the source of the Boundless Divine Stone first. As for those human martial gods, there was no need to worry about them. Their lowly lives are far less important than the Boundless Divine Stone. The Dragon Subduing General hesitated for a moment. Although he was unwilling, he could only follow orders. Thus, he gave the order for the fleet to change direction and fly towards the Heaven End God Nation. In the depths of the ruins of God, the ancient gazing platform was still floating in the sky, exuding an ancient aura. At this moment, a human male in fiery red armor galloped over from the south and landed on the ancient viewing platform. This person was the commander of the divine guards of the Tianqing Divine Kingdom. He had come on the orders of Divine Lord Tianqing to deliver something. He took out a black box half the height of a person from his spatial ring. According to Divine Lord Tianqing's instructions, he placed the box on the ancient viewing platform, released a signal arrow, and left. A moment later, his figure disappeared into the horizon. A black figure gradually appeared in the sky above the ancient gazing platform. It was a tall old man dressed in a black robe. His body was translucent and he seemed to be in between illusion and reality. He landed on the ancient gazing platform and looked down at the mysterious black box. Seeing the patterns and markings on the box, he immediately understood, and a hint of a smile flashed across his eyes. Ji Tianqing, that brat, sent me a message saying that he has a divine item that can help me increase my strength quickly. From the looks of it, this is the divine item that he sent over. As he muttered, the black-robed elder shot out a golden light from his right hand and unlocked the seal on the box. After opening the box, he saw that there were dozens of irregular black stones in the box. Although the stones looked ordinary, the black-robed elder's pupils constricted, and he revealed a look of shock. He reached out with both hands in disbelief and picked up a black stone, turning it over and over to observe it. It's hard to believe that he actually gave me a box of divine stones? This is a rare treasure in the world. A divine item that is far more valuable than a divine artifact. No wonder he dared to boast. The divine power contained in these divine stones is indeed amazing. After muttering to himself, the black-robed elder suppressed his surprise and calmed down. He put the box of divine stones into his interspatial ring and prepared to leave. He planned to go into seclusion for a while to test the effects of these mysterious divine stones and see how powerful they were. However, just as he turned around and stepped into the sky, his footsteps suddenly stopped. He felt that there was a strong sense of danger approaching, so he turned his head and looked to the north. However, the north was peaceful as usual. The black-robed elder frowned and slowly closed his eyes, releasing an invisible divine sense. His divine sense spread out like mercury and quickly spread to the north. Soon it covered a radius of 7,000 miles. He immediately saw that in the mountains 7,000 miles away, there were countless demons and giant beasts frantically fleeing. The various demons and beasts that usually hid underground and in the mountains would not show themselves. At this moment they were all out mingling together and fleeing in panic. Looking at the situation, it was as if they were being chased by an ancient demon. The black-robed elder sensed that something was wrong, so he crossed the sky 150 miles in one step and flew toward the north. In the blink of an eye, he had flown 20,000 miles. At this moment he saw a huge black shadow at the end of the horizon. It was streaking across the sky. The black shadow was triangular in shape and formed by hundreds of black dots that glowed with a dark red light. Even from a few thousand miles away, the black-robed elder could feel the fierce killing intent and powerful pressure. His pupils constricted, and his gaze became as cold as ice. It's the Heaven Punisher's fleet? Damn it! It's been 10 years, and the Heaven Punisher is coming back? The black-robed elder was the messenger of the ruins of God. He had fought with the Heaven Punisher before, so he naturally recognized the Heaven Punisher's battleships and their aura. Ji Tianqing had warned him a few years ago that the Heaven Punisher might come back for revenge. He had also thought of this and was slightly worried. However, he had not expected that his and Ji Tianqing's worries would come true. The Heaven Punisher had come so quickly. Moreover, the number of battleships had reached a shocking 100. Xinwu continent was about to face another calamity. The emissary did not hesitate to take out 3 transmission jade slips and send them to Ji Tianqing, Fairy Yuqing, and Martial God Taihao. The Heaven Punisher's fleet was about to invade, and he needed to gather the strength of many martial gods to resist. After sending out the messages, the emissary was still worried and muttered to himself, "This won't do. Even if Ji Tianqing and the others receive the news and rush over, they won't make it in time. I need to think of a way to delay the Heaven Punisher's fleet. I can't let them leave the ruins of God." Chapter 25-26. Whoosh! The emissary of the divine ruins disappeared in a flash and flew toward the fleet of the heaven-attacking tribe. Even though his strength had reached the LV8 martial god realm, he could look down on the world. He was not afraid of any of the heaven-attacking tribe's top powers. However, he knew that he had no chance of winning against the hundreds of heaven-attacking tribe's battleships. It was impossible for him to fight the fleet head-on. It was not that he did not have the courage, but it would be meaningless. He would not be able to stall for time. Therefore, he remained invisible and caught up with the heaven-attacking tribe's fleet. After following the fleet for a long time, The emissary of the divine ruins attacked decisively after figuring out the situation. Sky overturning seal. He raised both of his hands and formed a profound divine art. Surging divine power erupted and formed a giant golden divine seal. Whoosh! The seal, formed by tens of thousands of inscriptions, instantly covered an area of 600 miles and enveloped the entire fleet. The seal absorbed the divine power of heaven and earth and unleashed a powerful force that blasted toward the hundreds of battleships. Instantly, a terrifying force that seemed to be able to turn the world on its head exploded in the sky. The fleet that was flying at high speed was instantly stopped. The hundreds of black battleships were sent flying. They rolled and collided with each other, creating loud bangs. The entire fleet was instantly thrown into chaos. Dozens of battleships fell from the sky and crashed into the mountains and the ground. Several towering mountain peaks were smashed to pieces, and dozens of deep pits were smashed into the ground, causing dust to splatter everywhere, covering the sky and the sun. Only the Southern conquering Marshal's battleship remained balanced in the sky. The remaining hundreds of battleships were either lying on the ground in a disorderly manner or crashing around in random directions. Seeing this, the emissary of the divine ruins sneered. However, he did not show himself. He remained invisible and hid in the sky. His gaze was attracted to the leading battleship. He sized it up without blinking. The battleship was 2,000 feet long. It was pitch black and had a cold metallic luster. It gave off a powerful pressure. The battleship had a strange shape. Its sharp bow looked like a bird's beak. The ship had a streamlined body and two wide fan-shaped wings. The edges were densely packed with sawtooth and sharp blades. The tail of the battleship was also like a feather, spreading out like a fan, the edges of the arc flashing with a sharp cold light. The emissary of the divine ruins frowned and muttered to himself, "This warship is clearly the leader of the fleet." After being hit by this old man's sky-flipping seal, it only shook a dozen times but did not fall. It seemed like the grade of this battleship was even higher than the Marshal God grade, possibly reaching the true God grade. Could it be that the heaven-conquering fleet invading Shinwu continent has a true God powerhouse overseeing it? At the thought of this, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes were filled with deep worry. If that's the case, then Shinwu continent is in danger. At the same time, the dozens of warships that had fallen on the mountains and the ground were rejuvenated and flew back to the sky. Even though the attack just now had injured many soldiers of the heavenly expedition. However, the warship was very sturdy and was not destroyed. It was only slightly damaged and did not affect its flight or combat. Many of the warships quickly quieted down and arranged themselves in a formation in the sky, vigilantly guarding their surroundings. Many of the martial god captains released their formless consciousness and covered the surrounding 1,500 kilometers to search for traces of the enemy. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the heaven-conquering fleet were also ready to set off, their bodies bursting with intense battle intent. As long as they found the enemy that had secretly attacked them, they would bravely pounce over and tear them to pieces. In the Marshal's flagship, many black-armored soldiers were on high alert. The Southern Expedition Marshal and General Dragon Subduing were in the middle of a discussion when they were interrupted by a violent tremor. Both of them realized that the fleet had been attacked by a powerhouse, and they immediately frowned as cold killing intent flashed in their eyes. General Dragon Subduing gripped his pitch-black greatsword and said with a gloomy expression, "Damn bastards. We haven't even gone to find them for revenge, but they've already attacked us? These reckless bastards are really seeking their own deaths." Although he said this, he was secretly delighted. The Grand Marshal had not allowed him to take revenge immediately, but he had wanted him to find the source of the boundless divine stone first, so he had no choice but to obey. Now that a martial god powerhouse had taken the initiative to come to him, the Grand Marshal would definitely not let him off. He would use this opportunity to crush the other party and eliminate the hatred in his heart. The Southern Expedition Marshal was very calm. He was neither flustered nor angry. He said indifferently, "Dragon Subduing, go and see what's going on." General Dragon Subduing bowed and said, "Grand Marshal, the fleet has been attacked by a martial god powerhouse, but the losses are not great. The other party is hiding in the dark and attacking. I will go and find them now." With that, he turned and left the hall, flying out of the battleship. He held his greatsword and stood at the bow of the ship. His consciousness spread out like mercury and carefully searched the surrounding 1,000 kilometers. However, the surrounding 1,000 kilometers was silent, and there was nothing unusual. He frowned and released his consciousness again, expanding the search range to cover a radius of 1,500 kilometers. After 100 breaths, he searched the surrounding 3,000 kilometers but still found nothing. He did not believe it and expanded the search range to a radius of 9,000 kilometers. This was already his limit. His consciousness could only search such a large area. However, he still did not find any traces or aura of the enemy. Which bastard is it? How could he hide so well? Or maybe he ran away after attacking. General Dragon Subduing frowned and cursed with hatred. It's most likely that bastard Ji Tianqing. He is the most sinister and despicable. He is used to using such methods. Then, he transmitted his voice to the captains of the various battleships to ask if they had found any traces of the attacker. Over 100 captains replied one after another, but they all found nothing and did not find anything unusual. General Dragon Subduing's expression became increasingly ugly. He stood at the bow of the ship for a moment before returning to the battleship. Arriving in front of Marshal Jianan, he respectfully reporting to Marshal, "This subordinate and all the captains have searched and found no trace of the attacker." The Southern Expedition Marshal raised his eyebrows and asked in a low voice, "Was it an attack by an expert or accidentally entered a formation? Or was it because of other reasons?" General Dragon Subduing replied with certainty, "I have searched carefully. There is no formation here, and it was not caused by some divine artifact. Someone attacked secretly. However, the other party fled far away after attacking." The Southern Expedition Marshal's expression was a little gloomy. After a moment of silence he ordered, "Pass down the order. Continue forward." Thus, the fleet rearranged their formation and continued to fly toward the Heaven End God Nation. However, what everyone did not expect was that just as the fleet flew 1,000 kilometers, they were attacked by a mysterious expert again. The side of the fleet lit up with red flames that shot into the sky, and there was an earth-shattering explosion. Chapter 25-27. Boom! There was a deafening explosion as a dark red fireball with a diameter of more than 1,000 feet exploded on the side of the fleet. The dark red heavenly fire instantly engulfed more than a dozen battleships. The dozens of battleships around were sent flying by the force of the explosion. They rolled and crashed into the other battleships. After a series of explosions, the fleet was thrown into chaos again. The 14 battleships that were engulfed by the heavenly fire were burned red, and the temperature was high. They fell to the ground and smashed the two mountains into ruins. The soil was burned into dark red lava. The soldiers in the battleships only had the strength of a martial sage. They could barely resist the burning of the heavenly fire, and they were all seriously injured. What was more terrifying was that the raging heavenly fire contained the power of the spiritual soul. The soldiers were so dizzy that they almost fainted. In a short period of time, the more than 1,000 soldiers in the 14 battleships did not have much combat power. Only the 14 captains who were at the martial god realm could resist the burning of the heavenly fire and the impact of the spiritual soul. They were not hurt. After all, the battleships had neutralized most of the power. Even so, the 14 captains were still shocked and roared angrily. Swoosh! Swoosh! They escaped from the red battleships and flew into the sky with their swords and sabers. They looked around for the culprit. However, all directions were covered by a monstrous fire. They released their spiritual senses and could only see that the mountains and the ground were in a mess. There were more than 30 battleships in the sky and they were rolling and falling to the ground. From those battleships, the angry roars of the warriors and captains could be heard. However, there was no trace of the attacker. The people cursed angrily. A few captains even took out their sacred weapons and used a special secret skill to search for the attacker. Marshal Nanjang's battleship and dozens of other battleships that were not attacked stopped in the sky. Many captains flew out and discussed angrily. They were trying to find the culprit. In an instant, the entire fleet was in chaos. Everyone was angry and irritable. No one could bear to be attacked twice in a row. This was an intolerable provocation and humiliation. However, the most infuriating thing was that the attacker was hiding in the dark, and they could not find him. This time, the Southern Expedition Marshal was also furious. He furrowed his brows and looked at General Fu Long with a dark expression. His tone was cold as he said, "Fu Long, didn't you say that the attackers have already escaped?" This General Dragon Subduing was instantly embarrassed. He lowered his head in fear and trepidation, looking like he was admitting his guilt. "Please calm down, Grand Marshal. It's my fault for not being able to find the culprit behind the sneak attack." Marshal Nanjinan looked ahead with a sharp gaze and said in a playful tone, "You're already a LV9 martial god. But there's still someone hiding nearby and hiding from your divine sense. It seems that those martial gods are not as weak as you said. This five elements world is indeed a little interesting, worthy of Ben Shui personally making a trip." As he spoke, Marshal Jinan strode outside. General Dragon Fu hurriedly followed up and said, "Grand Marshal is right. Although the five elements world is small, there are many hidden talents, especially that Ji Tianxing. After all, he's the reincarnation of the Supreme Being from 1,000 years ago. Only you can kill him." Marshal Nanjinan curled his lips and sneered. "If he's the attacker, that's great. Ben Shui would also like to see how the Supreme Being who rules over the 9 heavens looks like." As they spoke, the two of them walked out of the battleship and came to the deck. Marshal Nanjinan closed his eyes and released an invisible divine sense. It turned into billions of ripples and spread out in all directions. He was a true God realm expert and was fundamentally different from a martial god, empty god. Regardless of whether it was his physical body or spiritual soul, they had been tempered by the laws of heaven and earth and had reached the realm of eliminating the false and retaining the true. Even though he had only released his divine sense and did not use any divine skill to attack, General Dragon Fu stood beside him and also felt a great pressure. He could not help but shrink his neck and lower his head. As Marshal Nanjinan's divine sense spread out, a cold and murderous aura shrouded the area. In just 2 short breaths, Marshal Nanjinan's divine sense had seen through everything. Regardless of whether it was a secret skill, a disguise using divine power, or a folded alternate space, nothing could escape his detection. He suddenly opened his eyes and turned his head to look to the left. A cold light flashed across his purple eyes and he sneered. So it's an old man. I don't think it's Ji Tianxing." General Dragon Subduing followed his gaze and saw that the sky to the left was abnormally calm and empty. However, he believed that Marshal Nanjinan had seen through the other party's disguise. At the same time, the messenger of the divine ruins, who had used a divine skill to hide in an alternate space, suddenly shook. He had thought that the divine skill he had mastered was very magical, and that no martial god would be able to discover him if he hid in an alternate space. Thus, he had been hiding in the wings of the battleship and looking for an opportunity to attack. It was only when Marshal Nanjinan appeared that he was alerted. When he saw General Dragon Fu following behind Marshal Nanjinan, he realized that Marshal Nanjinan's strength and status must be higher than General Dragon Fu's. As expected, Marshal Nanjinan released his divine sense and immediately locked onto his aura. Marshal Nanjinan's sharp gaze was like a real sharp blade. It pierced through thousands of feet and locked onto him, causing his hair to stand on end and a chill to run down his spine. *T. That guy saw through this old man's secret technique and locked onto this old man's soul. His aura is so strong. He's definitely not a martial god. He must be a true god. The messenger of the divine ruins was shocked. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, his nerves tensed up. After coming back to his senses, he did not hesitate to use a divine skill to escape through an alternate space. However, Marshal Nanjinan had expected him to escape and sneered. You've been discovered by Ben Shui and you still want to escape? Old man, you're too naive." As he sneered, Marshal Jinan raised his right palm and punched the sky. Kaboom! A thunderous sound exploded from the 9th heaven. The calm sky was shattered into pieces, revealing a black hole with a radius of 100 miles. Crimson-red heavenly fire poured down like a flood. The pitch-black astral winds also formed dozens of tornadoes, whistling as they came. The messenger of the divine ruins who was shuttling through the alternate space and trying to escape was also sent flying. After all, the sky had been shattered and the alternate space had been cut off by Marshal Nan Zhannan. The messenger of the divine ruins flew out from the black hole and was enveloped by the heavenly fire as he fell towards the ground. In midair, he spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. Without a doubt, he had been injured by Marshal Nan Zhannan. Even if he was an 8th-stage martial god in front of a true god like Marshal Nan Zhannan, he was extremely weak. The difference between the two realms was only one word, but the difference in strength was huge. End of this chapter. Chapter 25-28. In the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. The 6th level's distorted spacetime was as quiet as ever. Ji Tianqing had just ended his 40 years of closed-door cultivation. His strength had broken through to the 8th level martial god realm, and his combat power had increased by several times. After ending his cultivation, he got up and flew towards the depths of the distorted spacetime. Not long later, he flew to Yunyao's side and stopped. Yunyao, who was dressed in a white dress, was sitting in the spacetime, quietly circulating her energy to regulate her breathing. She did not go into closed-door cultivation. Instead, she seemed to be thinking about something and was very engrossed. Ji Tianqing looked at her bulging tummy and his gaze became much gentler. He muttered to himself, a long time ago, Yao Yao said that our children are about to be born. Now it seems that Changchen and Yaya will be born very soon. Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and woke Yunyao up. Yunyao ended her thoughts and opened her eyes to look at him. She said with a gentle expression, Tianqing, you're here. Looks like your strength has broken through again? Ji Tianqing nodded and asked with concern, I've just broken through to the 8th level martial god realm. What about you? Before I went into closed-door cultivation, you had already reached the 9th level martial god realm. Yunyao gave a bitter smile and shook her head. Although we have a huge amount of source stones, I've already reached the bottleneck. Even after 40 years of closed-door cultivation, I've only reached the peak of the 9th stage realm. I'm still unable to break through to the true god realm. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and comforted her. Don't be anxious. From the martial god realm to the true god realm, there's a gap between heaven and man. It's an extremely difficult gap to cross. Moreover, this is the interior of the god pagoda, and it's isolated from the heavenly Tao. To break through to the true god realm, you must go through the tempering and test of the laws of heaven and earth. Perhaps if you cultivate outside the god pagoda, your chances of breaking through to the true god realm will be higher. Yunyao nodded to show that she understood. All right, wait until I've accumulated enough foundation and have the confidence to break through. Then I'll go outside the god pagoda to try. Ji Tianqing asked with anticipation, Yao Yao, our children are about to be born, right? Yunyao lowered her head and caressed her bulging belly with both hands. She smiled gently and said, yes. The 2 little fellows have been in my womb for hundreds of years, and they are finally about to be born. Just now, I was thinking about this and I had a premonition that they would be born within a year at most. Ji Tianqing's eyes lit up, and he said with joy, born within a year? That's great. Yao Yao, you've worked hard all these years. Yunyao smiled and said, it's all worth it. Ji Tianqing pulled her hand and reminded her, since the children are about to be born, you should rest well first. After they are born, you can try to break through to the true god realm. I still have some matters to attend to, so you can rest here. Yunyao nodded and waved goodbye to him. Ji Tianqing turned and left, leaving the god pagoda very quickly. Shua! With a flash of golden light, he appeared at the peak of the barren mountain outside the Yin-Yang realm. It was evening, and the setting sun in the sky was as red as blood. Gray clouds rolled in the sky, and heaven and earth were filled with a heavy and oppressive aura. Ji Tianqing frowned and muttered subconsciously, there's such an ominous phenomenon. Is something big going to happen? After saying that, he was about to take out his communication jade slip and ask Bai Long to send more dawn stones back. All these years, the Golden Mountain King had been working hard to build the divine battleship without slacking off. He had used up a lot of dawn stones, and he did not have many left. However, just as he was about to take out his communication jade slip, A stream of light flew from the sky and landed in front of him. Swish! Ji Tianqing raised his head and saw that it was a communication jade slip. There was a special symbol carved on it. A message from the old man of the divine ruins? He raised his eyebrows with a trace of doubt. He reached out and grabbed the communication jade slip, and his divine sense entered it. The next moment, the old man of the divine ruins' deep and majestic voice sounded in his mind. Ji Tianqing, the heaven punishers are back. A fleet of more than 100 battleships has appeared in the divine ruins. Come and help us. These two short sentences contain too much information. Ji Tianqing's expression changed immediately, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Damn it! The heaven punishers are back. The invading fleet is even bigger this time. There are more than 100 battleships. Ji Tianqing frowned, and his mood was heavy and oppressive. He did not hesitate to send a message and ask Bai Long to settle the matters of the human race in the Earth's core cave, and immediately returned to the divine ruins. Then he returned to the Jiutian Ten Absolutes pagoda and quickly gathered Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and Qian Yu. After everyone gathered, Ji Tianqing announced the invasion of the heaven-punishing fleet. Suddenly hearing this news, everyone's hearts tightened, and they felt a great sense of danger and pressure. Yun Yao said with a serious expression, 10 years ago, when General Fu Long escaped, Tianqing had already predicted that this day would come. That's why we've been trying to find origin stones all these years and desperately raising our strength to prepare for this day. Since the heaven-punishing fleet is here, what are we waiting for? It's time to show our strength. Ji Ku nodded in agreement and said with a serious expression, fortunately, the heaven-punishing fleet appeared in the divine ruins and not in the 3 divine kingdoms. Otherwise, the people would have been in a terrible situation. We must hurry over to help the emissary of the divine ruins and stop the heaven punishers' fleet. We must not let them leave the divine ruins. Ji Tianqing said in a dignified tone, everyone has been conserving their strength for so many years. It's finally time to use it. Take your origin stones and divine weapons. We'll set off now. Ji Ku took out his origin stone armor and long spear. After putting them on, he looked valiant and extraordinary. Bai Long and Qian Yu also put on their special origin stone armor, to protect their vital points. Yun Yao also took out her armor and 2 swords and was about to put them on. Ji Tianqing quickly dissuaded her. Yao Yao, our child is about to be born. Don't go. Stay here and wait for our news. Ji Ku, Bai Long and Qian Yu also tried to persuade her to stay in the divine tower to recuperate. Yun Yao naturally disagreed. She shook her head and said, at this critical moment, how can I let all of you fight a bloody battle while I hide in the divine tower? You don't have to persuade me anymore. I want to go through thick and thin with all of you. I believe that Chanshan and Yaya will support my decision. Since Yun Yao was determined, no one tried to persuade her anymore. Ji Tianqing hesitated for a moment before he nodded and said, all right, let's go together. Then the group left Jiutian Ten Absolutes tower and rushed to the central region of the divine ruins. The 3 of them and the 2 divine beasts' strength had reached LV6 martial god realm, and they were protected by origin stones. Their speed was as fast as the aurora and they covered 1,000 miles in an instant. However, Ji Tianqing still felt a little regretful. He could not help but think, it's a pity that my divine worship is not complete. If I had an origin stone divine worship, my speed would be doubled and my combat strength would be even stronger. Chapter 25-29. The Yin-Yang mystic realm was in the northernmost part of the ruins of God. The ancient viewing platform was in the central part of the ruins of God. The 2 places were hundreds of thousands of miles apart. Ji Tianqing and the others used the power of the origin stones to teleport. In just 10 hours, they arrived at the central part of the ruins of God and were not far from the ancient viewing platform. While they were on their way, Ji Tianqing received 2 more communication jade slips from Martial God Taihao and Fairy Yu Qing. The contents of the messages were basically the same. They were all related to the heaven-defying fleet. Martial God Taihao and Fairy Yu Qing also knew about this and were rushing over at full speed. When Ji Tianqing and the others arrived near the ancient viewing platform, they found that the surroundings were calm. There were no traces of a battle within a radius of 20,000 miles. Seeing this scene, everyone was a little puzzled. However, no one doubted the words of the messenger of the ruins of God. They believed that he would not lie. Ji Tianqing guessed that the messenger of the ruins of God might be following the heaven-defying fleet and had already left the ancient viewing platform. Therefore, he sent a message to the messenger of the ruins of God to ask about the location and the situation. After a full 100 breaths, the messenger of the ruins of God replied. Ji Tianqing took the communication jade slip and used his divine sense to enter it. The messenger of the ruins of God's low and hoarse voice sounded in his mind. Ji Tianqing, wait for me near the ancient viewing platform. I am dealing with the heaven-defying fleet and leading them to the ancient viewing platform. Act according to the situation. The messenger of the ruins of God's voice was a little weak, as if he had suffered a serious injury, but he was still holding on. Ji Tianqing frowned when he realized something was amiss. A hint of worry flashed across his eyes. He put away the communication jade slip and said to everyone, the old man of the ruins of God has stalled the heaven-defying fleet alone and is seriously injured. He will soon lead the heaven-defying fleet here. Let's meet him here. After saying that, he pointed to the ancient viewing platform and said, before the heaven-defying fleet arrives, let's set up an ambush on the ancient viewing platform and give them a surprise. Everyone understood what he meant and nodded in agreement. Then, everyone came to the ancient viewing platform and began to set up a divine array. Ji Tianqing wanted to set up a true god-killing formation on the ancient gazing platform to deal with the heaven-conquering fleet. With his and the others' strength, it would have been impossible to complete the task in a short period of time. It would have taken at least a month. However, he generously took out 300 dawn stones and placed them around the ancient viewing platform as the foundation of the divine array. In this way, the origin stones would provide a vast amount of true god-level energy. He and the others only needed to set up the formation. Swish! Swish! With Ji Tianqing as the leader, he stood on top of the ancient gazing platform and formed a seal with his hands, shooting out a golden and silver light that blotted out the sky. Thousands of gold and silver light ribbons rained down on the ancient viewing platform. Yunyao, Jiku, Qianyu, and the Black Dragon also cast their spells. According to Ji Tianqing's instructions, they constructed the veins of the divine formation. This was a complicated and tedious project that did not allow for the slightest mistake. Everyone was focused on setting up the divine formation with all their might. Their efficiency was extremely fast. In a short 15 minutes, the foundation of the divine array was completed. Half an hour later, the complicated veins were also completed. An hour later, the divine array was basically completed. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao cast another 100 spells and completed the divine array. Swish! A dazzling 5-colored divine light burst out from the ancient gazing platform. It was even more dazzling than the sun, and it emitted a destructive energy wave. Soon, the divine light that blotted out the sky disappeared and retreated into the ancient gazing platform. After everything returned to normal, the divine array was completely set up and hidden in the ancient gazing platform. Ji Tianqing was pleased. He sneered and said, everyone disperse and hide to rest. When the sky-conquering fleet arrives, this 9-change galaxy array will teach them an unforgettable lesson. Everyone quickly dispersed and retreated thousands of miles away, hiding around the ancient gazing platform. Everyone, including Ji Tianqing, used a secret art to hide their divine power and waited patiently. In a short 15 minutes, the sky in the east lit up with a bloody light. Then a loud rumbling sound could be heard. Everyone turned to the east and saw a blurry black shadow flying towards them like an aurora. Behind the black shadow, there was a black cloud that covered the sky and was chasing after it relentlessly. Everyone looked carefully and saw that there were over 100 pitch-black warships in the black cloud. The leading battleship was extremely large, like a ferocious black bird. The giant bird's sharp beak kept shooting out dark red light beams towards the black shadow that was escaping in front. Boom! 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 The dark red pillar of light blasted into the sky, shattering it into countless black holes and cracks. Heavenly flames and gusts of wind poured out of the spatial rifts like torrential floods. That black shadow seemed particularly small, dodging left and right in the sky, fleeing in a sorry and dangerous manner. The fleet that was like a black cloud was like a ferocious primordial devil that was brimming with killing intent. It charged at Li Yao with terrifying pressure. Both sides were quickly approaching the ancient viewing platform. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and the others' hearts also gradually rose. They knew that the black shadow that was desperately escaping was the severely injured messenger of the ruins of God. They couldn't help but worry that if the messenger of the ruins of God didn't have enough power and couldn't dodge the dark red light beams, he would definitely end up in a miserable state. Fortunately, the messenger of the ruins of God didn't disappoint them. After a short while, the messenger of the ruins of God flew above the ancient viewing platform. He didn't stop at all and flew over the ancient viewing platform without hesitation. It was as if he didn't see the ancient viewing platform at all. Swoosh! After flying over the ancient viewing platform, the messenger of the ruins of God sped up and fled forward. The mighty sky-conquering fleet also arrived above the ancient viewing platform and flew over without stopping. After all, the southern conquering marshal and general dragon only had eyes for the messenger of the ruins of God. They didn't realize, nor did they think that there would be any mysteries behind that ancient stone platform. The southern conquering marshal and general dragon were standing on the deck at the bow of the ship and looking ahead with cold smiles. Seeing the messenger of the ruins of God's miserable appearance, the southern conquering marshal laughed contemptuously. "Coward! Run faster!" His thunderous voice reverberated in the sky. The southern conquering marshal was speaking the human language. Although his accent was a bit awkward, everyone understood. The messenger of the ruins of God turned his head and looked at him with a mocking smile. The Southern Expedition Marshal frowned and had a bad premonition. General Dragon's heart also skipped a beat and he muttered, "This old thing has been beaten half to death by us and is running all over the place. How dare he still?" Before he could finish his words, the simple and unadorned stone platform below suddenly burst into a brilliant light that soared into the sky. Whoosh! 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 The moon-white stone platform released tens of thousands of five-colored light blades and giant starry swords that instantly covered a radius of 100 miles. The hundreds of battleships in the entire fleet were instantly engulfed by the five-colored light. Chapter 25:30. Boom! 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 A deafening boom exploded in the sky, resounding through the 9 heavens. Every battleship had been hit by at least a few hundred attacks. There were star swords that were 1,000 feet long, divine flame light pillars that were 100 feet thick, 5-colored light blades and large axes. There were even a few thousand 5-colored divine lightnings. The Galaxy 9 Changes array was one of the more powerful killing arrays among the true god arrays. When Ji Tianqing had set up the array, he had added many different types of divine powers to allow the holy array to explode with such terrifying power. In the blink of an eye, over 100 battleships had been thrown out and crashed into one another. Every battleship was riddled with holes and cracks. Their energy was leaking out crazily. There were also many soldiers of the Heaven Expedition in black armor that fell out of the gaps and cracks. Their fates were obvious. They had all been killed by the Galaxy 9 Changes array, and nothing was left of them. Even Marshal Nanjing's battleship had been thrown out, and it had smashed a few battleships before coming to a stop. The heavens and the earth were in chaos. The screams and roars of the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army resounded throughout the universe. This was only the first wave of attacks from the Galaxy 9 Changes array, and it had caused the heaven-conquering fleet to suffer heavy losses. Over 80 battleships had been severely damaged. The lighter ones were covered in wounds and the more serious ones were twisted. Over 1,000 Marshal Sage Realm soldiers in black armor had been killed by the array and their corpses had been destroyed. The sudden change caused the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army to panic. Marshal Nanjing and General Long Fu were enraged and killing intent shot out from their bodies. That D*MNB* starred. He actually set up an ambush here and deliberately led us into a trap. Marshal Nanjing saw that the fleet had suffered heavy losses and he was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He clenched his fists tightly. Previously, he had thought that victory was within his grasp and he had acted like a cat playing with a mouse. He had not even been in a hurry to kill the messenger of the holy ruins. He had only wanted the messenger to walk towards his death in despair. Now, he had paid the price for underestimating the messenger of the holy ruins. This was a slap to his face. The dragon-subduing general's gaze pierced through the divine light and stared at the messenger of the divine ruins 200 miles away. He cursed in a sinister tone, "Sinister and despicable old thing. I will definitely tear you into pieces." After saying that, he said to the Southern Expedition Marshal beside him, "Grand Marshal, the messenger of the ruins of God has been running for his life, so he definitely won't have the chance to set up an ambush here. Besides, the formation on the ancient gazing platform had obviously surpassed the martial god realm, and had reached the true god realm. Therefore, I suspect that he has a helper." Marshal Jianan looked at him coldly and asked, "Didn't you tell Ben Shui that that old thing is the strongest person on Shenwu continent? Apart from him, who else can set up a true god-level grand array?" This General Dragon Subduing was speechless and didn't know how to explain. At the same time, the ancient viewing platform lit up with dazzling five-colored light as the second round of attacks erupted. Tens of thousands of saber lights and sword shadows, as well as lightning and fire pillars, bombarded the 30 or so battleships. At the sight of this scene, General Dragon Subduing's eyes narrowed as he revealed an expression of realization. "Grand Marshal, I understand now. There are no true gods on this continent, so they can set up a true god-level grand array by relying on the Boundless God Stone. I have already sensed the aura of the Boundless God Stone on the ancient gazing platform." "I see." Marshal Jianan nodded slightly and said coldly, "It seems that they have already discovered the effects and power of the Boundless God Stone, and they have also found the source of the stone." General Dragon Subduing sneered, "This way we can save ourselves the trouble. We only need to capture them and interrogate them." Marshal Jianan nodded and waved his hand to order, "Pass down the order. Get everyone to stay away from the ancient gazing platform. Ben Shui wants to see what other methods they have besides that true god-level grand array." In fact, after the heaven-conquering fleet had been ambushed by the divine array once, they had all fled in all directions. Only 30 or so battleships had been attacked twice by the divine array, and their fates were very miserable. Those battleships had been distorted and cut into pieces, turning into piles of scrap metal that fell to the ground. More than 2,000 black-armored soldiers had been killed, and more than 1,000 soldiers had been lucky enough to survive, but they were also seriously injured. Only the 30 or so captains of the martial god realm had only suffered minor injuries and could still continue to fight. Following Marshal Jianan's order, the 60 or so battleships retreated to a distance of 200 miles. The 30 or so captains also retreated, flying to the sides of the marshal's flagship and standing still. The 1,000 or so soldiers of the heaven-conquering fleet, who were seriously injured, had met with a disaster. In the process of their retreat, the Milky Way 9 Changes Grand Array launched its third attack. Following a series of loud bangs, the 1,000 or so soldiers were swallowed by the five-colored light and blasted into pieces of flesh and blood, dying on the spot. After the five-colored light dissipated, the world regained its calm, but the pungent smell of blood still lingered in the air. The heaven-conquering fleet stopped in the sky 200 miles away, in a vigilant and alert posture. Marshal Jianan, General Dragon Subduing, and more than 30 captains stood on the deck of the flagship, staring at the messenger of the divine ruins in the distance. The messenger of the divine ruins stopped running and stood in the sky above the ancient viewing platform, facing off against the heaven-conquering fleet. "Ha ha ha. Bastards of the heaven-conquering fleet, how does it feel to be ambushed?" The messenger of the divine ruins laughed coldly, his tone full of contempt and provocation. General Dragon Subduing and more than 30 captains were enraged, their eyes surging with murderous intent. "Marshal, please allow us to fight. We will definitely capture that old thing alive, and let you do whatever you want with him." General Dragon Subduing bowed and asked for permission to fight in a serious tone. Marshal Jianan raised his hand and looked sharply at the messenger of the divine ruins. He shouted loudly, "Human worms of the 5 elements world only have this much ability. These are just some despicable tricks, yet you are so proud of them. Old thing, listen carefully. Ben Shui was the Marshal Jianan, who led millions of soldiers under the heaven-conquering emperor. He was the current master of the Purple Cloud Star Zone. Even the most powerful purple cloud star had become Bunchui's property. A mere 5 elements world would soon be under Bunchui's feet. Let me give you one last piece of advice. Admit your guilt and surrender obediently, and Bunchui might spare your lowly life. Although his human language was a bit lame, his voice was filled with murderous intent. His aura was majestic and domineering. His voice reverberated in the sky, containing supreme divine power, causing everyone's divine souls to tremble. The messenger of the divine ruins' expression changed slightly, and a trace of seriousness flashed across his eyes. Only now did he know that the galaxy outside the 5 elements world had undergone such a drastic change. However, he was not afraid and said proudly, "What heaven-conquering fleet? What master of the star zone? You are just a group of uncivilized beasts. I am just a tombkeeper. You can't even do anything to me. What right do you have to invade the 5 elements world?" End of chapter. Chapter 25-31. The Southern Expedition Marshal was not in a hurry to attack, and the messenger of the divine ruins was happy to stall for time. Taking this opportunity, he quietly took a healing pill and circulated his energy to recuperate his injuries. The Southern Expedition Marshal saw through his actions and thoughts, but he did not take it to heart. After all, he was most concerned about the person who set up the true God-level array. "Old thing, Bunchui disdains to bicker with a frog at the bottom of a well like you. The person who set up the array on the ancient viewing platform must be your accomplice. Get them out and Bunchui can finish them off together." The Southern Expedition Marshal looked coldly at the messenger of the divine ruins and shouted arrogantly. The messenger of the divine ruins pretended to be puzzled and sneered. "Accomplice? I'm the only one here. How can I have an accomplice? Bastard of the Heaven Punishing Clan, are you scared? If you are, get out of the 5 elements world as soon as possible to avoid being buried here." The messenger of the divine ruins knew that the array on the ancient viewing platform was set up by Ji Tianqing. Since Ji Tianqing hid and did not show up, he naturally had his own plans, and the messenger of the divine ruins would not admit it. The Southern Expedition Marshal naturally did not believe him and sneered contemptuously. "Old thing, don't pretend to be confused with Bunchui. You are just an 8th stage void god. Even if you have the boundless godstone, you can't set up a true god-level array. If Bunchui guessed correctly, this should be Ji Tianqing's method. I heard that he is the reincarnation of the Divine King from 1,000 years ago, and only he can master a true god-level array. Get him out and die together." The messenger of the divine ruins was stunned and asked in puzzlement, "Boundless godstone? What is that? Ugly beast. Have you lost your mind or something? Or are you delusional?" This time, the messenger of the divine ruins was not pretending. He had never heard of the boundless godstone. The Southern Expedition Marshal was completely enraged and said murderously, "Old thing, Bunchui's patience has run out. Your dog life ends here." When he finished speaking, he raised his fists and punched the messenger of the divine ruins above the ancient viewing platform. Boom! Boom! 2 dark red fists the size of mountains instantly traversed 200 kilometers in the sky and arrived in front of the emissary of the divine ruins. The emissary of the divine ruins was shocked. His figure flashed and teleported hundreds of kilometers away, barely dodging the fist attack. However, while the emissary of the divine ruins dodged, the ancient viewing platform was hit by the 2 fists. Boom! Amidst the deafening explosion, the ancient gazing platform shook violently, and rubble flew everywhere. The dark red fist radiance collapsed on the spot, turning into millions of fragments that scattered in all directions. After suffering such a heavy blow, the ancient viewing platform was on the verge of shattering. The surface of the platform was covered with cracks like a spider web. The foundation of the Milky Way 9 Transformations Grand Array that was set up on the stage was also damaged, and its power became extremely chaotic. Swish! Swish! The ancient viewing platform, which was full of cracks, flashed with 5-colored divine light, and quickly leaked out a vast amount of divine power. Seeing this, the emissary of the divine ruins felt his heart ache and thought regretfully, "Damn it! The grand array that Tianqing laid down was actually destroyed by him. I originally planned to use this grand array to deal with the heaven-defying fleet, but it seems like there's no hope now. The previous battle and pursuit had already shown him the terrifying strength of the Southern Expedition Marshal. Now, the Southern Expedition Marshal had almost destroyed the ancient gazing platform with just one move. His expression became more and more serious, and a layer of haze covered his heart. A thought flashed through his mind uncontrollably. How can a few martial gods resist the ferocious army of the heaven-conquering fleet? Who can stop the Southern Expedition Marshal? Who is at the true god stage? At the same time, the Southern Expedition Marshal waved his palms again, and sent out two dark red light blades that were thousands of feet long. His target was not the emissary of the divine ruins, but the ancient gazing platform in the sky. Obviously, he wanted to destroy the divine array on the ancient gazing platform first before killing the emissary of the divine ruins. The emissary of the divine ruins was anxious. He growled and was about to block it. However, at this moment, a bright golden light lit up the northern sky, and a cold and majestic voice was heard. A mere true god dares to be so presumptuous here? When the cold shout was heard, the two dazzling golden swords had already arrived first, piercing the dark red light blade. Kaboom! An earth-shattering sound exploded, shaking heaven and earth. The golden swords and the dark red light blades collapsed at the same time, exploding into thousands of pieces and scattering in the sky. The Southern Expedition Marshal's killer move had actually been neutralized. Such a scene caused everyone to turn pale with fright, and they revealed an expression of disbelief. The emissary of the divine ruins was shocked. He looked to the north with burning eyes and muttered, "In just a few years, his strength has actually reached such a level? This is unbelievable." Even though he knew that this person was the reincarnation of the Divine King, he still could not believe this result. The Southern Expedition Marshal looked to the north and stared at the white figure that was flashing over. His lips curled into a sinister smile. The reincarnation of the Divine King? Indeed, he is quite capable. The dragon-subduing general also looked at the newcomer with resentment and revealed a cruel and sinister smile. Ji Tianqing. After 10 years I can finally take revenge. After the Grand Marshal captures you, I will definitely cut off your head with my own hands. In the blink of an eye, the white figure teleported from 3,000 miles away to the sky above the ancient viewing platform. Swoosh! When his figure turned from an illusion to a real one, his true appearance was revealed. He was tall and in high spirits. His white robe fluttered in the wind, and his aura was unparalleled. There was no doubt that the newcomer was Ji Tianqing. His left hand was behind his back, and his right hand was holding the pitch-black sword of burial of heaven. He pointed it at the ground, and his aura was sacred and overbearing. Even though he only looked coldly at the Southern Expedition Marshal, the dragon-subduing general, and the others, his invisible divine power enveloped 1,000 miles. The Southern Expedition Marshal and many heaven punishers felt an overwhelming divine power pressing down on them. Instantly their hearts tightened, and a trace of fear appeared in their divine souls. That was a suppression that came from the bloodline and divine soul level. Ji Tianqing had the blood of a divine king, and the soul of a divine king. He naturally had an innate noble and majestic aura. He glanced at the Southern Expedition Marshal, and then at the dragon-subduing general. He sneered disdainfully. "Dragon-subduing, you have disappointed me. You have forgotten the lesson from back then and dare to make a comeback. This time no one can save you. You are dead meat." The dragon-subduing general was shocked by Ji Tianqing's aura. He forgot to refute and could not help but take a step back. When he came back to his senses, he was instantly enraged. He shouted arrogantly, "Ji Tianqing, you are the one who doesn't know that you are about to die. This time, I have invited the Southern Expedition Marshal to come with me. I have brought over 100 captains and nearly 10,000 elite soldiers. Not only will you die without a burial place, but the entire Five Elements world will also prostrate under the Marshal's feet." Ji Tianqing sneered mockingly. He sized up the Southern Expedition Marshal and shook his head. "Dragon-subduing, no wonder you dare to come back to die. Turns out that you have found a backer. It's a pity that your backer is too weak." Chapter 2532. Too weak. These 3 words enraged the southern conquering marshal and the top powers of the sky-slaying tribe. This was an unforgivable humiliation. However, Ji Tianqing had said it so casually as though he was stating the truth. How could the top powers of the sky-slaying tribe not be enraged? In the eyes of General Long Fu and the other captains, the southern conquering marshal, who was a true god, was an invincible god. He was a real immortal god. Everyone treated the southern conquering marshal like a god. How could they tolerate Ji Tianqing's humiliation? However, before the southern conquering marshal gave the order, General Long Fu and the other captains did not dare to attack. The southern conquering marshal stared at Ji Tianqing and laughed in anger. Ha ha ha. You are indeed the reincarnation of a supreme being. Although you have not regained your former strength, your arrogance and confidence have not diminished. The southern conquering marshal shook his head and sighed regretfully. It is a pity that you are only a LV8 martial god. It is ridiculous for you to say such arrogant words. Although Ji Tianqing's strength and body constitution were special, and no one could see through his cultivation level, the southern conquering marshal was a true god. However, the southern expedition marshal was a true divinity, a realm higher than Ji Tianqing. No matter how well Ji Tianqing hid, he could not hide from the southern conquering marshal. Following Marshal Zhenan's words, more than 30 captains burst into laughter and began to discuss with contempt. Ha ha ha. I thought he was powerful. I did not expect him to be so arrogant when he is only a LV8 martial god. Ha ha, that guy must still be living in a dream. He thinks he is the king of gods. This 5 elements realm is too weak. The southern conquering marshal can destroy it with a flip of his palm. Many captains mocked Ji Tianqing without restraint, their faces filled with pride. Only General Long Fu remained silent. His expression was ugly and his eyes were filled with shock. He stared at Ji Tianqing and muttered in disbelief, LV8 martial god? How is this possible? He had just broken through to the martial god realm 10 years ago. It had only been 10 years and he had already reached the 8th stage realm? I don't believe it. How can there be such a strange thing in the world? When the Southern Expedition Marshal heard the dragon subduing general's voice, his expression froze. What did you say? The South conquering marshal turned his head and stared at the dragon subduing general with his eyes wide open. General Dragon Fu slowly lifted his head and said with a bitter expression, Grand Marshal, when I escaped from the 5 elements world, Ji Tianqing had just broken through to the martial god realm. The Southern Expedition Marshal was dumbfounded. His face was full of shock, and he didn't know what to say. The mocking laughter of the captains stopped abruptly. Everyone was speechless. They were all dumbfounded as they stood on the spot with their mouths agape. After a long time someone gasped and exclaimed. In fact, many people were unable to accept this fact and started to question General Dragon subduing. Fu Long, you must be mistaken. Who in the world can improve from the 1st level martial god realm to the 8th level in 10 years? That's right. We have conquered the purple cloud star zone and been to dozens of worlds, but we have never heard of such a thing. This is definitely not true. How can there be such a demonic genius in the world? Even if he is the reincarnation of a supreme being, it is impossible for him to improve by 7 levels in 10 years. That is the martial god realm. Everyone knew that the advancement of a martial god realm expert was very slow. Even a top genius would need 1 to 200 years to improve by 1 level. No one dared to question the Southern Expedition Marshal, so they could only question General Dragon Fu. General Dragon Fu remained silent. He was speechless. The Southern Expedition Marshal's expression was dark and his eyes were solemn. At the same time, Ji Tianqing's loud laughter came from the sky. Ha ha ha. Weren't you all arrogant and domineering just now? Why are you all so cowardly now? If they admitted defeat, they would obediently lay down their weapons and surrender. Perhaps I will be merciful and give you a dignified death. Ji Tianqing returned the Southern conquering marshal's words back to him even more harshly. The messenger of the divine ruins was in a good mood and could not help but laugh. At the same time he secretly asked Ji Tianqing, Tianqing, other than you, who else is here? Ji Tianqing replied, Yunyao, Jiku and my 2 divine beasts. They will not show up for the time being and are hiding in the dark. I have other plans. The messenger of the divine ruins calmed down and said, That's good. However, our strength is still not enough. We have to continue stalling for time. When Tai Hao and Fairy Yuqing arrive, we will be qualified to deal with them. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, They have more people and the Southern Expedition Marshal is a true God Realm expert. He will not be scared by me. Even if all of our people are here, we cannot fight them head-on. We can only try our best to deal with them. Fortunately, the Divine Ruins is vast. As long as we restrain the fleet and prevent them from leaving the Divine Ruins, we will be halfway to success. Ji Tianqing appeared to be extremely confident and domineering. However, he was doing this to buy time. Only he knew that they had no chance of winning against the heaven-defying fleet. Once they were defeated, the Five Elements world would be finished. After a while, the experts of the heaven-defying clan came back to their senses and woke up from their shock. The Southern Expedition Marshal looked at Ji Tianqing sharply and said in a deep voice, Ji Tianqing, Ben Shuai has to admit that your aptitude is extremely high. Ben Shuai has never seen anyone like you in his life. A monstrous genius like you has never been seen before in all of history. If you insist on resisting, it would be a pity for you to die here. Ben Shuai will give you one chance. If you are willing to surrender, Ben Shuai will protect you and recommend you to the Great Emperor. With your talent, you will definitely be valued by the Great Emperor just like Ben Shuai. You have to know that our Great Emperor can reach the Divine Court and has the ambition and ability to rule the 3,000 worlds. As he spoke, the Southern Expedition Marshal pointed at the sky and said in a serious tone, You know very well that this is a world sealed by the gods. Even if you are the reincarnation of the deity king, you will not be able to leave this world, let alone return to the divine realm. As long as you surrender, Ben Shuai will take you away and ensure that you can ascend smoothly. Marshal Nan Zhinan's words were extremely attractive to the martial gods of the five-element realm. However, he was facing Ji Tianqing. The result was obvious. Ha 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 ha. What a joke. Ji Tianqing laughed contemptuously at the sky. Since you know that I am the reincarnation of the deity king, how dare you say such ignorant and ridiculous things? How can a mere great emperor of the heaven-defying clan be worthy of my surrender? He is not even worthy of being my servant. Even the divine court you speak of is just a joke in my eyes. As for leaving this sealed world, that is even more ridiculous. If I don't have a way to ascend, how did I ascend to the divine realm 1,000 years ago and become the king of gods? Chapter 25-33. The South conquering marshal was rendered speechless. He looked extremely embarrassed. The dragon-subduing general and the other captains were so angry that they almost exploded on the spot. The great emperor of Heaven Punisher was the supreme leader of the Heaven Punisher tribe. Every member of the Heaven Punisher tribe viewed the great emperor of Heaven Punisher as their religion. They would not allow anyone to blaspheme him. Ji Tianqing's words had crossed their bottom line. They could not tolerate it anymore. Grand Marshal, the dragon-subduing marshal requests for battle. Captain Xing Yi requests for battle. Captain Lu Ming requests for battle. Captain Changfeng requests for battle. Only by tearing the lowly martial god of the human race into pieces can the hatred in our hearts be appeased. The dragon-subduing general and more than 30 captains all shouted and requested for battle. Even if they were to be smashed into pieces and their blood stained the sky, they would tear Ji Tianqing into pieces. The South conquering marshal would not stop them. He shouted with a murderous aura, All soldiers listen up! Kill Ji Tianqing and that old bastard at all costs. As the sound of his voice faded, the dragon-subduing general and over 30 captains all drew their weapons, roaring as they pounced toward Ji Tianqing. The other 60 or so warships also revealed rows of cannons, releasing dark red light beams that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Boom! 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 Kill! Charge! Deafening explosions and earth-shattering cries exploded in the sky and shook the universe. In an instant, the ancient viewing platform was drowned by the dark red light beams. Boom! 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 A deafening sound burst out, and the red light and the broken stones burst out. The area within a radius of 100 miles was completely messed up. The ancient viewing platform had already been destroyed by the South conquering Marshal. Now that it was being attacked by more than 10 warships, it collapsed on the spot. Along with the cracking sounds, the ancient viewing platform with a radius of 10 miles shattered into several hundred large rocks and fell from the sky. The Star River 9 changes array on the platform collapsed just like that. 300 pitch-black origin stones were also scattered in the sky, covered in debris. By the time the thousands of dark red light pillars came crashing down, the emissary of the divine ruins had already teleported 100 kilometers away. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, donned his pitch-black origin stone armor, blocking the attacks of the dark red beams of light, as he collected the origin stones that were falling from the sky. Even though he had a lot of origin stones, losing 300 wouldn't make much of a difference. However, he did not want those origin stones to fall into the hands of the heaven punishers. Pung pung pung. Dark red pillars of light hit him one after another, producing a series of muffled booms. In the short span of 2 breaths, he was struck more than 800 times. Even though the defense of the origin stone armor was strong enough to neutralize the attack of the dark red pillar of light and protect him from harm, the origin stone armor was still able to protect him. However, he was still sent flying dozens of miles away, tumbling over 100 times in the air. When the red light dissipated, he had only collected 100 or so origin stones. There was still half of the origin stones falling from the sky to the ground. He wanted to use a grappling technique to grab those origin stones back. It was a pity that the dragon's subduing general and over 30 captains had already killed their way over. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. They slashed out giant red blades that covered the sky and unleashed all kinds of divine techniques that poured down like floodwaters. Ji Tianqing was fearless as he roared furiously and charged forward to meet him. Relying on the strong defense of the origin stone armor, he swung the burial of heaven's sword and unleashed hundreds of sword radiances. Sun Crush. The dazzling golden sword radiance shattered the giant red blades in the sky and hit over a dozen captains. With muffled booms, the armor of the captains was slashed open by the sword radiance. Dark red blood spurted out from their bodies. With a series of painful groans, the captains were sent flying. However, the other 20 captains' attacks all hit Ji Tianqing. Bang! Bang! Ji Tianqing was also sent flying by the violent force. He tumbled over 100 miles away. Fortunately, the captains were unable to break the defense of the origin stone armor. Not even a dent was left on the surface of the armor. Ji Tianqing was safe and sound. He was about to regain his composure and charge toward the captains again. At this moment, the dozens of battleships not far away shot out more than 3,000 dark red light beams, swallowing him up. Boom! 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 At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing had no time to dodge. He could only inject his divine power into the armor and block with all his might. The result was without a doubt that he had blocked the bombardment of the light pillars and was not injured. However, he was blasted down from the sky by the terrifying force of the impact and smashed into the ruins below. He had just jumped out of the ruins and was about to fly into the sky. The 30 captains joined forces and performed their divine techniques again. They released endless red light and drowned him. Boom! 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 Ji Tianqing was blasted into the ruins again and smashed into the ground. The ruins that were 100 miles wide had more than doubled in size. Within 1,000 miles, more than a dozen mountains had collapsed. Countless ravines had also appeared on the ground. Ji Tianqing was completely helpless. He was weak, but he had to withstand the siege of more than 30 martial gods and more than 30 battleships. No matter how strong he was and how powerful he would not be able to fight back. If not for the protection of the Dawn Stone armor, he would have been seriously injured. After all, ants could bite an elephant to death. Even a true god could not withstand the siege of so many people. Damn it! I can't be delayed by them. I have to lead them to coup. This thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind. He simply burrowed into the ground and fled toward the north. While escaping, he used his divine sense to observe the situation on the battlefield. He saw that the messenger of the divine ruins was also being bombarded by more than 30 battleships and was fleeing in a sorry state. He did not know Ji Tianqing's specific plan, nor did he know where the ambush was, so he could only circle around the ancient viewing platform. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing hurriedly reminded him, "Senior, flee to the north." The messenger of the divine ruins immediately had a target and fled toward the north. On the marshal's flagship not far away, Marshal Nan stood at the bow of the ship and sneered when he saw Ji Tianqing and the messenger of the divine ruins fleeing together. Hehehe. Reincarnation of the divine king? Tomb keeper? They are all useless. Our race's fleet is invincible. We have used our divine cannons to conquer countless worlds and dominate various star zones. Two mere insects of the human race want to stop Ben Shuai's attack? Today, this marshal will blast you all to smithereens. After sneering, Marshal Nan waved his hand and gave the order to pursue. More than 60 battleships flew toward the north and chased after the messenger of the divine ruins. At the same time, dozens of battleships continued to fire at the messenger of the divine ruins in the sky. General Long Fu and more than 30 captains held weapons and chased after Ji Tianqing, who was traveling underground. The Heaven Punishers' morale was high. They had regained their confidence and were exceptionally domineering. In a short while, the two sides had chased for more than 10,000 miles. The fleet and more than 30 captains were finally lured into the ambush by Ji Tianqing. End of chapter. Chapter 25-34. This area wasn't big. It was only 100 miles wide. On the surface, it looked like a barren mountain range with a few valleys. But before Ji Tianqing showed up, He Yunyao, Ji Ku and the others had set up all kinds of divine arrays. After he left, Yunyao, Ji Ku and the others didn't stop while he was talking nonsense with South Conquering Marshal. In the seemingly peaceful barren mountains and deep valleys, terrifying formations had long been buried. South Conquering Marshal was cautious. He had been ambushed a few times before and had learned his lesson. Even though Ji Tianqing and the emissary of the divine ruins were running away, he was still cautious. Would there be any traps ahead? So he also spread out his immortal will to check the situation in the sky and on the ground. When the heaven-defying fleet flew over the mountains and passed by a deep valley, the heaven-defying fleet suddenly stopped. South Conquering Marshal suddenly sensed that there was a powerful divine power hidden in the valley and the surrounding mountains. He immediately frowned and realized the danger. He waved his hand and ordered the fleet to stop. However, General Dragon and more than 30 captains and more than 20 battleships had already rushed into the valley. They were too excited. They just wanted to kill Ji Tianqing as soon as possible and tear apart the guy who insulted Emperor Tian Punisher. When they heard South Conquering Marshal's order, it was too late to retreat. Boom! 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 The next moment, hundreds of fire pillars of different colors appeared in the barren valley. There were golden sacred flames, red Nanmingli fire, black annihilation fire and purple soul-eating fire. More than 300 fire pillars as thick as water tanks shot up from the valley and attacked the captains and more than 20 battleships. At the same time, starry sword auras, icy blue ice spears and black North Sea water dragons also appeared in the mountains around the valley. All kinds of divine spells appeared and drowned the captains and battleships. Only 40 battleships stopped in time after hearing South Conquering Marshal's order. These warships stopped outside the valley and quickly retreated. The dozens of captains and thousands of soldiers on the battleship saw their companions being ambushed with their own eyes. They all showed grief and indignation and let out angry roars. Rumble! A loud sound reverberated in the sky. The colorful brilliance of the divine spell enveloped an area of 100 miles and illuminated the night sky. A devastating shockwave swept out in all directions like a violent gale. The mountains around the deep valley were flattened. Gravel and dust flew everywhere. The earth was trembling crazily, and 100-li-long ravines split open, collapsing continuously. As for General Dragon subduing and the others, as well as the 20-odd battleships, their fates were naturally miserable. The armors of more than 30 captains were shattered. Their bodies were covered with wounds and blood was spurting out. There were 12 people who were the most unlucky. They were already injured, and now they were directly blasted into pieces. The 20 or so captains who were lucky enough to survive were all missing arms and legs. Their bodies were covered in hideous wounds that exposed their bones. A series of screams and cries of pain echoed in the sky. The heavily injured captains fled into the distance in panic. They would not be able to fight for a short period of time. As for the 20-plus warships, they were also distorted and filled with cracks and craters. Another 1,000 or so black-armored soldiers were killed, and more than a dozen captains were lightly injured. After regaining their senses, many of the battleships quickly retreated and fled to the vicinity of the Marshal's flagship. The battleships were in a mess. The soldiers were all circulating their energy to heal their injuries or save their heavily injured companions. Such heavy losses caused South Conquering Marshal's heart to bleed. He was so angry that he almost went berserk. Ah! Sinister, despicable human worms. When Ben Shui takes the unbounded divine stone, he will definitely destroy this dirty world. South Conquering Marshal was seething with anger as he roared with murderous intent. A few hours ago, he had led the heaven-conquering fleet and ambitiously charged into Xinwu continent. He wanted to take the unbounded divine stone and enslave this world. However, he had not expected that in just a few hours, he would encounter setbacks and attacks. 40 of the 100 battleships had been destroyed. Of the remaining 60 battleships, half were covered in scars. Of the 10,000 elite martial sages, more than 3,000 had been slaughtered, leaving only 6,000 or so. Of the 100 martial god captains, 12 had been killed, and 23 had been heavily injured. This was a truly unfavorable start to the war. Only then did South Conquering Marshal completely believe Dragon Subduing General's words. This seemingly ordinary five elements realm was truly filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It was impossible to guard against. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. After the divine light that covered the sky dissipated, all of the battleships retreated behind the Marshal's flagship and remained vigilant of their surroundings. More than 20 heavily injured captains also entered the Marshal's flagship to circulate their energy to heal their injuries. Dragon Subduing General's face was covered in blood as he returned to South Conquering Marshal's side in a sorry state. This time, Dragon Subduing General did not hesitate and said in a solemn tone, "Marshal, I believe that you have seen the methods of Ji Qianxing and the emissary of the Divine Ruins. They are sinister and despicable, and they have all sorts of schemes and tricks. We have just entered Xinwu continent and have already suffered such heavy losses. You must take action and kill Ji Qianxing and the emissary of the Divine Ruins for our plan to proceed smoothly." Although Dragon Subduing General's words were somewhat accusatory, South Conquering Marshal did not get angry. He completely put away his contempt and treated Ji Qianxing and the others with caution. Whoosh! He stepped into the sky and looked down at the ruins from above. He then raised his fists and smashed them down fiercely. Boom! Boom! Two dark red fists the size of mountains slammed into the ruins of the ground. Following an earth-shattering explosion, a huge crater appeared in the ground, and endless amounts of dust burst out. The array formations hidden underground were destroyed on the spot. The incomparably powerful impact flattened everything within a radius of 500 miles. Ji Qianxing, Yunyao, Jiku, and the others who were hiding underground, as well as the emissary of the Divine Ruins in the sky, were all sent flying. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The four martial gods, Hei Long and Qin Yu, were all forced to fly into the sky and reveal their true forms. Everyone gathered in the sky and stood in a row, facing the heaven-conquering fleet with a common hatred. Ji Qianxing took out a set of origin stone armor from his spatial ring and handed it to the emissary of the Divine Ruins. "Senior, I have a set of armor here. Put it on. The armor may not be of excellent quality, but it is made of special materials and has powerful defenses." The emissary of the Divine Ruins took the armor and looked at it. A look of astonishment flashed through his eyes as he asked, "Isn't this armor made of the black stone that you gave me? Could it be that the black divine stone is the boundless god stone that South Conquering Marshal was talking about?" Boundless god stone? Ji Qianxing raised his eyebrows and smiled. "That's what the heaven-conquering race calls it. We call it an origin stone. It's because of this divine stone that we have the qualifications to intercept the heaven-conquering fleet. Chapter 25:35. The messenger of the divine ruins did not refuse. He knew that this was a special moment, so he did not refuse. He quickly put on the energy stone armor. At the same time, the South-conquering marshal looked at everyone with fire in his eyes and roared coldly. Worms of the human race, you have completely infuriated Ben Shui. Don't beg for mercy. Only by killing all of you will we be able to answer to our soldiers. The South-conquering marshal raised his fists and shot out dozens of dark red fire pillars. They were like giant dragons that shot toward Ji Tianqing, Yunniao and the others. 16 fire dragons flew across the sky. Their dazzling flames lit up the area. A terrifying suppressive force sealed the area. No one could dodge. They could only use their arts to block it. The colorful divine light collided with the dark red fire dragons, creating an earth-shattering explosion. Bam! 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 The explosion spread across a few thousand miles. Dazzling fragments of divine light burst out and covered the sky. The violent impact sent everyone flying. The black dragon and Qianyu also fell from the sky and landed on the ground, creating 2 giant pits. Fortunately, everyone had the energy stone armor to protect them, which neutralized most of the impact. Even though their faces were covered in dust and they looked miserable, they were not seriously injured. However, just as they were about to counterattack, the attacks came one after another. Boom! 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 60 battleships fired at the same time. Thousands of dark red light pillars drowned the crowd. Following a series of loud explosions, the ground within a radius of several hundred miles was blasted into ruins that were filled with ravines and craters. Everyone was sent flying again. They rolled and fell into the ruins. They looked even more miserable. Jiku, the messenger of the divine ruins, Qianyu and the black dragon were all injured. Only Ji Tianqing and Yunniao were unharmed. Before they could recover, the South-conquering marshal waved his hands again. More than 20 dark red light blades slashed toward them like giant axes. The 60 battleships also accumulated a vast amount of energy. They were about to shoot out red light beams in the next moment. When she saw this, Yunniao shouted with a grave expression, "We can't let this continue. We can't fight the Heaven Punisher head-on." As she spoke, she flew into the sky without any regard for her own safety, wielding her 2 swords to meet the southern marshal. The power of heaven and earth, the glory of the sun and the moon. Yin and yang and the 5 elements coexist, and the cycle of heaven and earth is endless. Great Qiankuan sword. She murmured expressionlessly. She waved the source stone divine sword with both hands and unleashed the most ferocious divine power. She used her ultimate divine technique. Swoosh! Swish! Instantly, the 2 source stone divine swords lit up and turned into 5-colored giant swords that were 10 miles long. They slashed towards the South-conquering marshal with unparalleled power. Boom! With a deafening sound, the Southern Expedition Marshal's dark red axe was shattered into pieces by the 5-colored giant sword. The power of the 5-colored giant sword didn't decrease as it slashed at the Southern Expedition Marshal. The violent and unparalleled power sent Marshal Nanjinan flying. He rolled and smashed into the marshal's flagship behind him. He rolled a dozen times on the deck of the warship before he managed to get rid of the impact and came to a stop. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing, the messenger of the divine ruins, and the others were excited. They looked forward to the battle. No one had expected Yunniao to be able to unleash the power of the true god realm when she was only a LV9 martial god. However, the next scene caused everyone's hot-bloodedness to die down. Marshal Nanjinan stood up. He stretched his neck and stretched his limbs before he flew back into the sky. He looked safe and sound. There wasn't a single wound on his body. It was as though Yunniao's attack was just an itch for him. He looked down at everyone with disdain and sneered. Ha 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 ha! A bunch of empty god realm ants. How dare you think you can hurt Ben Shui? You've overestimated yourselves. As soon as he finished speaking, he formed a seal with both hands. Red light shot out from his body as he used his ultimate divine technique. Refined Starbreak. As he roared, the endless red light that covered the sky condensed into hundreds of dark red sabers that were thousands of feet long. They shot toward everyone like a rain of arrows. Bang! 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 The red light shrouded everything within a few hundred miles. It was chaotic and blurry. No one could see their figures clearly. A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating endlessly in the sky, deafening everyone's ears. Yunyao Ji Tianxing Ji Ku and the messenger of the divine ruins were sent flying again. Qian Yu and He Long were also sent flying. Their injuries were even more serious. There were a few hideous wounds on their bodies and blood was flowing out. Marshal Nanjinan and the 60 warships were chasing after them and were about to attack again. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing decisively led everyone to retreat. Don't fight recklessly. Let's retreat first and try to deal with them later. The messenger of the divine ruins also agreed with his decision and said, let's retreat to the ancient viewing platform first. I have a way to deal with them. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing, Yunyao and Jika's eyes lit up. A glimmer of hope surged in their hearts. The old man of the divine ruins has a way to deal with the heaven destroyers? Does he have any other trump cards? He has guarded the divine ruins for thousands of years. His identity is very mysterious. He must have a trump card. As long as the messenger of the divine ruins can stall the heaven destroyers, we can defeat them one by one. With that thought in mind, everyone sped up and flew toward the ancient viewing platform. Swish, swish, swish. Everyone and the 2 divine beasts ran for their lives. Their figures flickered in the sky at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Marshal Nanjinan shouted with murderous intent, lowly insects, don't even think about escaping from Benshui. As he said that, he waved his hand and ordered the fleet to chase after them. Many captains and heaven destroyers were still worried that there would be more ambushes and traps ahead. But Marshal Nanjinan took the lead and charged at the front. He had learned his lesson from before. While chasing, he released his divine sense to explore an area with a radius of 20,000 miles. No formation or ambush could escape the detection of his divine sense. This time he would definitely not be ambushed again. He would not make the same mistake a third time. Soon 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianxing, Yunyao, and the others avoided Marshal Nanjinan's attacks and the fleet's bombardment. They finally escaped to the ancient viewing platform. Although the ancient viewing platform had been destroyed and the surrounding mountains had been leveled, only 1,000 miles of ruins were left. But everyone believed in the messenger of the divine ruins and hoped that he would use his trump card. Senior, how are you going to deal with Marshal Nanjinan and the Heaven Destroyer's fleet? Everyone flew over the ruins. Ji Tianxing looked at the messenger of the divine ruins and asked. The messenger of the divine ruins hesitated and did not answer. Right at this moment, an icy blue stream of light flew over from the front. Swish! In the blink of an eye, the stream of light arrived. Everyone looked over and saw that within the icy blue brilliance was a white-haired woman in a white dress. It was Fairy Yu Qing who had rushed over to help. End of chapter. This book came from Chapter 2536. Seeing Fairy Yu Qing appear, everyone was stunned for a moment, and the same thought appeared in their minds. Could the trump card of the messenger of the divine ruins be Fairy Yu Qing? But on second thought, this should be impossible. Fairy Yu Qing's strength was the same as the messenger of the divine ruins, or even a little weaker. How could she be considered a trump card? Swoosh! In the next moment, Fairy Yu Qing flew closer and met up with everyone. Sorry I'm late. She nodded to everyone and greeted them. Then she asked, how's the situation? The situation was urgent, so the messenger of the divine ruins did not say much. He only replied, there are too many of them. We can only avoid them for now and try to deal with them. Fairy Yu Qing looked up into the distance and saw a vast black shadow streaking across the sky at lightning speed, chasing after them. Seeing this scene, she could not help but frown with a solemn expression. There are so many battleships? Ji Tianxing added, the leader is the Southern Expedition Marshal of the Heaven Punisher race. He has the strength of a true immortal. A true immortal? Fairy Yu Qing's pupils constricted, and she could not help but gasp. Before anyone could answer, the Southern Expedition Marshal had already chased after them with his fleet. Boom! 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 Dozens of battleships fired at the same time. blasting out thousands of dark red light pillars that poured down on everyone. Everyone's expression changed, and they hurriedly scattered in all directions, casting spells to dodge. Bang! 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 A series of muffled sounds exploded, and everyone was sent flying again. Including Fairy Yuqing, everyone was hit by at least a dozen cannons. Their hair was disheveled, and their faces were covered in dust. Everyone's injuries were more serious, and their strength was greatly depleted. Their combat strength began to decline. Before everyone could circulate their energy to suppress their injuries, the Southern Expedition Marshal charged over again. Human worms, no matter how many of you there are, you're still a motley crew. Die! As he roared, the Southern Expedition Marshal turned into a dark red phantom and rushed into the crowd, attacking with his fists and feet. Everyone could only use their ultimate techniques and divine skills to resist with all their might. Boom! Smack! Bang! Bang! Muffled collisions and the sound of divine power collapsing rang out one after another. Everyone fought with the Southern Expedition Marshal. They were constantly sent flying, but they rushed back without any regard for their own safety. Even though Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, the messenger of the divine ruins, and Fairy Yuqing were all quite powerful, the four of them besieged the Southern Expedition Marshal, and were barely able to fight to a draw. However, Marshal Zhenan had 60 warships and dozens of captains to help. They had sealed off an area of 800 miles, forming a huge encirclement. Dark red pillars of light and divine art killer moves rained down like a storm, drowning Ji Tianqing and the others. Everyone was attacked from the front and back, unable to hold on any longer. The two sides had only exchanged blows for 100 breaths of time, but their injuries had already worsened. They could only retreat as they fought. Just as the two sides were engaged in a fierce battle, a dazzling golden light came from afar. Within the golden light was a middle-aged man wearing armor and holding a heavy sword. It was Marshal God Taihao. As soon as he arrived near the battlefield, he saw dozens of huge warships and dozens of experts of the heaven-punishing race surrounding Ji Tianqing and the others. The tragic situation of the battle caused his heart to burn with worry, and his chest erupted with flames of rage that soared to the sky. He didn't charge into the encirclement. Instead, he charged toward a warship with endless killing intent. Go to hell, you bastard of the heaven-punishing race! Marshal God Taihao roared. He held the heavy sword with both hands and slashed down from the sky. Boom! Crack! The giant golden blade that was 1,000 feet long hit the warship with a thunderous sound. Although the battleship was smashed from the sky and smashed into the ground. However, the warship was unscathed after the giant golden blade exploded. Only a shallow dent was left on the warship. After all, Marshal God Taihao's heavy sword was only a mid-grade Void God Divine Sword, which was the same grade as the warship. This sudden scene caused the other warships to turn pale with fright. The 9 warships nearby all turned around and aimed their cannons at Marshal God Taihao. Boom! 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 The 9 warships fired their cannons at the same time. Thousands of dark red light beams covered Marshal God Taihao. Boom! 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 Although Marshal God Taihao tried his best to dodge, he could only dodge part of the light beams. He was still hit by hundreds of light beams. He was sent flying backward on the spot, tumbling hundreds of miles away. While he was still in midair, his body was already twisted and deformed. Blood spurted out from his mouth and nose, scattering across the sky. Before he landed, the warship that had crashed to the ground flew back into the sky. The 10 warships locked onto him and shot out thousands of dark red light beams again. Seeing the dark red light beams coming toward him, Marshal God Taihao sensed the great danger of death. His expression changed drastically and his pupils contracted. At the moment of life and death, he could only unleash all his divine power and form a golden light shield around him. He held the divine sword in front of him with both hands. Boom! 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 Another series of loud noises erupted, resounding throughout the universe. Marshal God Taihao's divine light shield shattered. The divine sword in his hand was broken in half. Blood and pieces of flesh splattered all over his body. When he fell from the sky and landed in the ruins, He was severely injured. His body was a bloody mess. His entire left arm was shattered. His legs were broken at the knees. His calves were missing. He crawled in the ruins and used his only arm to support himself. He slowly straightened his body and lifted his bloodied face. Bastards of the heaven punishers! Even if we are crushed to pieces, we humans will never yield. Marshal Gott Taihao's eyes were as red as fire. He roared at the top of his lungs. Even though he was not strong enough and his body was damaged, he did not back off. The next moment, more than a dozen warships locked onto him and shot out dark red and purple light beams at the same time. More than 1,600 light beams had been compressed by the divine formation. Their power was twice as strong as before. Boom! 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 The dark red light beams poured down from the sky like raindrops and drowned Marshal Gott Taihao. Before he died, he transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing, the emissary of the ruins of God, and the others. I'll leave the world of 5 elements to you. I've tried my best. When the voice echoed in everyone's minds, they realized Marshal Gott Taihao was on the verge of death. The crowd turned around and saw a pillar of light devouring Marshal Gott Taihao. Boom! An earth-shattering bang that resounded throughout the universe exploded between heaven and earth, and it was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. The ground within a few thousand miles shook violently. A bottomless pit was left behind. Endless dust and golden blood splattered into the sky. Marshal Gott Taihao had died on the spot. His body and divine soul were shattered and returned to the heavens and earth. Seeing this, everyone was filled with grief and anger. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. However, the others were surrounded and on the verge of death. Their situation was not any better than his. Even if they wanted to save him, they were powerless. Chapter 25:37. Marshal Gott Taihao had returned to heaven and earth. His physical body and divine soul had been destroyed, leaving only some scattered pieces of armor and broken sword in the ruins. If he had the protection of the Dawnstone armor, he might have been able to hold on for a while longer and not die so quickly. Unfortunately, he did not manage to break into the encirclement or come into contact with Ji Tianxing and the others. After he died, the dozen or so battleships turned around and aimed at Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and the others firing again. Dark red light pillars covered the sky and poured down like a rain of arrows. The mountains and rivers within a radius of 800 miles were blown up countless times, raising a lot of dust and sand. Ji Tianxing, the messenger of the divine ruins, and the others not only had to resist the bombardment of dozens of battleships, but they also had to fight with the Southern Expedition Marshal, General Fu Long, and the others. Under such circumstances, it was extremely dangerous and they could lose their lives at any time. Everyone's injuries became more and more serious. In just a few minutes, they could no longer hold on and could only retreat in a sorry state. Everyone was seriously injured, covered in blood, and their hair was disheveled. Fortunately, they had the protection of the Dawnstone armor to hold on until now. Otherwise, they would have been blasted into pieces like Marshal Gott Taihao. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone supported their seriously injured bodies and retreated into the depths of the mountains. The Southern Expedition Marshal was full of fighting spirit. He looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. Ha 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 ha. A bunch of chickens and dogs, do you finally understand that the situation is irreversible? In the face of absolute power, all of your despicable tricks have no use at all. Now you can say your last words. As he roared, the Southern Expedition Marshal led the fleet and followed closely behind Ji Tianxing and the others. The two sides chased for 6,000 miles and came to a majestic and vast mountain range. This mountain range was particularly majestic. There were no trees or plants around, and even the soil was dead gray. It was silent and desolate. The retreating messenger of the divine ruins suddenly stopped and no longer ran. He looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and said in a low voice, "Don't run anymore, it's meaningless." Fairy Yuqing frowned and asked anxiously, "Old man, what do you mean? Are you going to give up?" Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and actually nodded in agreement with the messenger of the ruins of God. He said with a solemn expression, "We are too passive. Even if we continue to run, We will only exhaust ourselves and be killed one by the Southern Expedition Marshal. If they split up, it would be difficult for them to escape. Furthermore, the heaven-destroying fleet would leave the ruins of God and slaughter the entire Shinwu continent. No one could stop them. At this juncture, we must think of a way to deal with the heaven-defying fleet. At the very least, we must injure the Southern Expedition Marshal. Hearing his words, everyone fell silent. The emissary of the divine ruins looked behind him coldly, staring at the Southern Expedition Marshal and the heaven-destroying fleet. Now that things have come to this, I can only use my final trump card to end this calamity. Hearing this, everyone's hearts lit up with hope, and they all looked at him expectantly. However, Fairy Yuqing could hear the solemn and resolute tone of the messenger of the ruins of God. Her heart immediately tightened, and she hurriedly asked, "Old man, what are you trying to do?" The emissary of the ruins of God did not answer. He looked at everyone with a solemn expression and solemnly instructed, "All of you stay here and defend. No matter what, you have to buy me 100 breaths of time. After 100 breaths, if you are still alive, we will have one." This time it was not only Fairy Yuqing who felt that something was wrong. Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and the others also had a bad premonition. Everyone surrounded the emissary of the ruins of God and asked worriedly, "Senior, what are you trying to do?" "Old man, what do you mean?" The emissary of the ruins of God did not answer. He turned around and flew towards the mountain range not far away, leaving everyone with a desolate and lonely back view. Everyone looked at his back with mixed feelings. Fairy Yuqing could not help but follow him and question in a sad voice. However, the emissary of the ruins of God resolutely moved forward and landed on the peak of the highest mountain. He took out an ancient, dark black stone tablet from his bosom and closed his eyes to begin casting a spell. The stone tablet was only the size of a palm, and there were traces of fractures on the edges. The surface was rough, and there were a few ancient patterns, but they had long been blurred. Anyone could tell that this stone tablet was definitely an ancient item, and it emitted an endless vicissitude aura. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. As the emissary of the ruins of God waved his hands, the ancient stone tablet began to spin above his head. Thousands of strands of golden light surged out from the top of the emissary of the ruins of God's head and surged into the ancient stone tablet, causing the stone tablet to light up with golden light and reveal strange and mysterious golden patterns. Seeing him like this, Fairy Yuqing vaguely guessed something. Her heart trembled and her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. "No, old man, stop it." However, the emissary of the ruins of God turned a deaf ear and continued to use his secret technique. In the sky not far away, the Southern Expedition Marshal had already arrived. He waved his hand and shot out more than a dozen giant blades that could split heaven and earth, charging towards Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and the others. Further away, 60 battleships were coming over in a grandiose manner. They were dispersing their formation and forming an encirclement. Fairy Yuqing could not delay any longer. She could only turn around with tears in her eyes and face the Southern Expedition Marshal and the heaven-defying fleet. An even more tragic battle immediately began. Bang! 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 The dark red giant axes that could split heaven and earth blasted Ji Tianqing and the others away, causing them to spit out blood. Ji Tianqing flew 30 miles away before he could dissipate the terrifying impact. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of golden blood. His figure flashed and he rushed to a battleship on the side. Swoosh! His body emitted golden light and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a 30-meter-tall giant. This was the ultimate skill of the celestial dragon tyrant body. It increased his combat strength by 5 times, and he instantly reached the peak of the martial god realm. He stood above the battleship, holding the sword of burial of heaven with both hands. He roared and slashed down fiercely. Open! The sword of burial of heaven also erupted with golden light that shot into the sky. It formed a giant sword that was thousands of feet long and erupted with destructive power. The pitch-black battleship could not dodge in time, and was hit by the giant divine sword on the spot. Kaboom! With a thunderous explosion, the battleship was cut in half by the sword of burial of heaven on the spot. The wreckage of the battleship that was cut in half fell from the sky and smashed into the ruined ground. More than 20 of the hundreds of heaven-defying soldiers in black armor were killed by the giant sword on the spot. The remaining 70 or so people fled from the wreckage of the battleship in a panic and flew into the sky to form a battle formation. They wanted to join forces to deal with Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing, who was in a frenzy, had already unleashed his maximum strength and slashed with his sword again. Burial of heaven! As he roared, a pitch-black sword light that was 10 miles long slashed into the crowd. Immediately, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. More than 50 black-armored soldiers were killed in an instant. They died without a complete corpse. The remaining 20 or so people were lucky enough to survive, but they did not escape far before they were killed by Ji Tianqing's sword light. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.